Okay, everyone rise, please, for the pledge. Let's begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, so welcome everyone. Always glad to see people in the audience. So tonight I need approval of the agenda.
I move to approve.
I'll second. Okay, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
None opposed? Okay, and approval of the minutes. I believe there's a couple of corrections.
Just one that I reported to you. We thank you, Jane, for finding a word that was in an original document but not in the final. So we've added that word. The minutes have been corrected on our website, and based on the one that we sent to you earlier today, it's correct.
Okay.
I'll move to approve.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
None opposed. All right, Tony, we have our student representative. Welcome.
Hi. At Topa Topa, they will have its fall festival on October 28th from 4 to 7 p.m. Miramani students will participate in Red Ribbon Week during the week of October 24th to October 28th. Miners Oaks had its Jogathon on October 12th and will have its Fall Festival on Friday, October 21st. A special thank you to the Optimist Club of Ojai for donating enough money to buy a class set of beach chairs so students can read in the meadows. Some Miners Oaks classes meet up with Nordhoff High School classes for science in the meadows. Miners Oaks also received a grant to pay for binoculars, and the students have been able to do some bird watching. At Matilaha, leadership students are casting the principal's weekly message as a newscast, so now families can watch the Matilaha Junior High School news on YouTube. There is also a group of students casting for the weekly message in Spanish. Chaparral has added a hospitality class to their career tech lineup. Students will be certified in safe food handling and will meet with potential employers in the area to learn about opportunities and expectations. Nordhoff students in leadership are promoting breast and liver cancer awareness by asking students to wear pink and/or green every Friday in October to show support for those whose lives have been touched by cancer. We will give every student a sticker next Friday in order to show support for people whose lives have been touched by cancer. October is also Anti-Bullying Awareness Month. We are planning a homeroom run and a video to play in second period classrooms that focuses on cyberbullying. The video features interviews with Nordhoff students regarding being responsible on social media. On the final Friday of October, we plan to give every student a blue ribbon to tie on the fence in a show of commitment to being kind to one another.
Great. That's great. Have you ever participated in the Relay for Life that happens at Nordhoff?
I've always wanted to, but I haven't yet.
It's pretty amazing for anyone who hasn't been. It's quite big groups of young people spend the night at Nordhoff at the field, the football field, and walk for 24 hours as to raise money for cancer research. It's quite fabulous. So, well, I highly recommend it.
I'll try to go.
All right, thank you very much. That was great.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks.
You don't have to stay. I know you have lots of stuff to do.
Thank you.
No, she said she's staying.
Oh, she
She's staying.
Not.
We're moving on to public comments. So our first speaker is Angie Janasi.
See you later.
I am Angie Janasi, and I am the president of the Ojai Federation of Teachers. And tonight, usually I'm up here advocating for my colleagues in some manner, usually something to do with compensation. And tonight, though, I am here to say thank you. We got an email today, and Andy and the other administrators are compensating the teachers for their work in piloting curriculum for ELD or ELA for the elementary. And I just want to say thank you. I think that in any time that we can uplift our morale. It's I don't know, I just think it's wonderful, and I want to make sure that I say thank you when it happens. So that's all.
Thank you. Great. Okay. Our next speaker, Jonas Svensson.
Okay, thank you so much. So I just wanted to address the board very quickly, because we felt we were mostly coming today to listen to what you had to say and how you were thinking about the process of potentially leasing or selling this property. And we put together a statement that I sent to Hank last week, and basically about our general thoughts of what we thought would be appropriate to do with Chaparral High School. And I don't have a lot to add right at this moment, but I just wanted to say that we as a group, we all live here in Ojai. We feel it's a very sensitive matter of what this property becomes, and I feel like we have the needed experience to continue to work with you to find a way that that's possible, and we would love to work together with you over the next coming weeks. This is something that you feel is appropriate. So I just wanted to say thank you for having us today, and we'd be happy to listen to what you have to say.
Any questions for Jonas?
I actually have one question.
Yes.
We had a joint meeting with the city. I don't know if you saw that, about historical designation for the property.
Yes.
And I would just like to get some feedback on your thoughts about.
Well, that's one of the reasons why we feel very strongly about this, is that our intention is to keep the historic integrity of this property. And Eric Good, who's not here today, is Warner Ebbing and Provincial Shearer. We're a group of 4 partners that decided to work together on this. He was approached probably in 2008 by David Burry, who was then the mayor at that time, to look at this property from that perspective. And I think that's a very important thing for us, and that's it's part of why this project is.
Right. The reason I asked the question, though, is really I think there's a difference, an important difference between maintaining the historical nature of the facility and having it be designated a historic site,
Okay.
with additional perhaps regulation. But you don't have thoughts or comments?
We don't have at this point. No, we will be happy to work with you and the city and historical committee to do whatever is right and correct for the building. Our intention, what we want to do, is to keep the historical integrity of the building in place.
The thing, Andreas can address that if you want to ask him when he's.
No, that's fine. No, that was a very appropriate answer.
There you go. Okay.
But I felt I needed to ask the question.
Right. So there's the business perspective and the legal perspective.
So I think we both did what we needed to do.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Ted Moore.
Good evening, everybody. I'll give you my answer to that question, too.
Good. Well, I would have asked you anyway.
All right, good. I have, it's pretty much in my presentation, but I mean, I've lived here almost 28 years now, and I have a long history of commercial real estate development, so I'm very, very comfortable with the whole process. And I've done mostly shopping centers over the years, and some mixed-use projects as well. This is a really unique piece of property. You only get one chance at this, okay, and you don't want to screw it up. It's almost what I would call a heritage type of property, almost like the heritage trees we see in different areas. I'm kind of coining that phrase. And it's because of its location and its size and its history, it has to be looked at very carefully. And I think the needs of the community need to be reflected, the issues of the community need to be reflected as you develop this. Where you might like to develop this entirely on your own and make all the decisions involved, you've got the city council and you've got the public at large. And just if you recall what happened, of course, in the skateboard park, there was quite a bit of input you got from the community on that. So, my plan really tries to reflect that. It's not that I'm necessarily opposed to hotels. It's just that I'm trying to do something I think would really fit in terms of you know, addressing the housing shortage, for example, which is really acute in this community. I don't know if you're all familiar with it, but it is very acute. And it's controversial, you know, as people try to develop sites around. And why I like housing in the downtown area is because people don't have to get in their cars. You know, they can just walk to work, they can walk to shop, and that's really part of the whole idea. And that's how you would have to address the mitigation issues, you know, because you're not allowed to increase the traffic AM or PM peak hour through Cedar Springs by one traffic trip. So basically it's a real stopper, you know, if you will, that has to be designed and worked out. And when I look at a property like this, especially here in Ojai, I look at the context of the whole community. And you know, for years I've developed projects in small cities throughout California. And there are certain things I've learned that really make up for the health of a community. And I would call them the foundation or the critical institutions. And so it's important to have a healthy local government, schools, a school district that it's financially strong and the teachers are well paid, the business sector, water supply, housing availability, property values, tourism, the environment, recreational needs, medical community, religious, spiritual, and I could go on for quite a while. All those things have to be looked at when you develop something like this in this community. Many may not be impacted, some will be impacted. And the community is going to have a lot of input into this project, and they're going to require, and I would volunteer to have town hall meetings where I'm, getting people's input. So those are basically my initial thoughts, and you see my proposal. Happy to sit down and go through it in more in depth than what I have in mind. So.
Okay. Any questions for Ted?
I don't know that you got to mine yet.
No, I'm ready for your question.
Okay.
I have developed.
And I have another one. It wasn't relevant for.
I'm not a. I like historical context and heritage context, if you will, but if you designated a historical building and it's accepted, say, at the state level, you've really gotten yourself into a difficult position. And I've developed projects where you've had to do this. You have to hire a special architect that's state approved, and it gets very costly. And when you do things as simple as try to change windows, in a project, you can't do it unless you go through this very time-consuming and expensive process. So I'm not a big fan of it. I think you can still do a really great project with paying a lot of attention to the historical nature of the project and retaining as much of the project as you can, which I would do. Like the buildings that we're in, I would probably want to expand them somewhat to make, because it's, when you look at the two frontages out here, right, on Ojai Avenue and on Montgomery, it's pretty dead, really. And if you're going to turn it into an alive project where people want to come and sit down and have outdoor restaurants and so forth, you've got to transform that. And it gets very difficult if you've got a historical designation.
So the other question was, what would be your thoughts or opinions about any housing having a first right of refusal for district teachers or employees?
I'm very much in favor of that. That would be fine. I think when I've talked for many years with Hank and his predecessors, I think there's at least two about this property over the years, and I don't know if it's. I think one of the meetings we had an attorney there, and they raised the issue if that's legal to do. I would like to do it if I can do that. So sure, that's fine with me.
Okay. How would you go about doing that? I noticed you used the term affordable by design.
Yeah.
You have to build it, and it costs you a certain amount to do it, and
yeah.
you would just be willing to forego some profit?
No. Well, let me explain what affordable design means. Okay, it's basically. I mean, there's a whole downsizing trend that's going on among housing. If you look at major markets, they're actually building smaller apartments. I guess you could say, legitimately, it started in Manhattan, but now you see it in San Francisco and Seattle and Portland and various cities. And it's basically building smaller units so you can charge less rent. And it might be the same rent per square foot, but the studios are 400 feet, maybe 600 feet in some cases. And I have like 4 different sizes, I would think, like 400, 600, maybe 1,000, 1,200, something like that, So studios up through 1 and 2 bedrooms. is what I would have in mind. You know, I've also found that if you say affordable, it puts like a you know, a negative you know, stamp on it, and you have difficulty with people in the area. Sometimes it's concern for property values, but it's a way I can afford it. The other thing I would build into a project would be some storage space for people, because with this huge downsizing trend, you know, we all have so much stuff that we carry around with us that it's really a good idea to give something like maybe an 8x8 or an 8x10 that you can build into the project. So I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, I know that there are some public interest type builders of affordable housing.
Yeah.
But you're not talking about that.
No, that requires, I mean, that's, I know you've, was it People Self-Help, I guess is the one who was involved over near City Hall. The other one is Cabrillo. I've done projects with Cabrillo. And the only way they can make it work is if they get, there's a whole tax credit program. You know, they got their money from, they had some donors who put money in who got tax benefits from it. They also had some major banks, I think Wells Fargo bought tax credits. So basically they are underwriting their project and getting, you know, free cash, if you will, or free equity in the deal. That's the only way they can make those projects work.
Interesting.
I mean, you can devote a little bit, maybe 5–10% of your project, but you know the margins are tight on a residential project. But it's possible. You know, I'd look at that, but that's not really my intent at the moment.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
And I know this is early stages.
Yeah.
I don't mean to bombard you, but
Yeah.
just curious.
Well, I mean, the whole point here is to try to give the district, you know, a really steady cash flow. I mean, and part of that is it's got to really succeed as a residential project. I could do it in phases, and I would do it side by side. You know, lenders today don't like mixed-use projects as much. I mean, they'll finance them, but you're a lot safer if you do like the apartments over there and the retail office here. You know, so you probably would need to break it up into separate parcels. Would be part of it, but that's all part of how you would structure the deal as you move forward.
Do you think you actually formally need to create separate parcels?
I think you'd have to, because lenders want a single asset usually on a project, and they don't want you, in other words, the issue becomes if, let's say, the retail started to fail for some reason, and it could drag down the housing portion of it, if you will, in terms of an asset generating money. So they like to have a single asset project, and it's usually a requirement, frankly, to do that. So.
Thank you.
Okay, sure. I'm around if you have any other questions.
Okay, thank you. All right, now we have a presentation on the potential lease, and you want to introduce our guest?
Love to. Good to have you back, Andreas. It's been about 4 years or so.
That's been a long time.
Yeah, he was here back as the first 7-Eleven committee that dealt with the issue of this property was completing its work and came to the board to make a presentation about that concept, which is now the same concept we're looking at this point. Just to remind people, this came up a lot during the second 7-Eleven committee meeting when there was quite a bit of conversation about, well, you know, we had this committee back several years ago, and why hasn't anything been done? The simple answer, and Ted alluded to the fact that he and I have had several conversations over the years. I just had the benefit of meeting Jonas and his colleagues, but it was clear to everybody, starting with the real estate agents in town, that to try to move forward with any kind of lease or sale for all or part of this property in the timing of 2012, 13, 14, into 15 would have been a financial disaster. Obviously, things are way better now. That's really good. And so my thought was twofold. One, back in the December 2015 into January 2016, to have this board become a board. We knew that we'd have at least 2 members leaving of the former board, and it turned out to be 3. So we had quite a new board. They had then an opportunity to come together and talk about how they would like to have this potential property considered for lease or sale. And then, of course, we moved into the 7-Eleven committee to take a look at the elementary schools. Once that was done, that was sort of then phase 1. Phase 2 was post 7-Eleven committee on the elementary schools, and so here we are to have Andreas back to talk about how the board, succeeding board, obviously not by December of 2016, but a succeeding board or boards might consider the sale or lease of all or part of this property. From a legal perspective, I'm sure you'll get into some of the issues that have already been raised tonight, some questions. There are many, many attendant issues. Thane alluded to the meeting we had with the city and some conversation about landmarking. That has yet to be updated for sure. But I thought it was just a perfect time, Andreas, to have you come back. And Andreas is the lead or one of the lead real estate attorneys in the very large law firm we use for all kinds of legal work, better known as AALRR. I won't bother you with all the names. But welcome back.
Mine's not one of them.
I know it's not. Well, I wondered, I have to say this as an aside, my dad was an attorney for about 50 years, and I could never understand why his name wasn't on the law firm. And he said, just wait, enough people will pass away.
Oh.
Right? Okay. So by the time he got to be about 65, he was right. Okay? So in any case, welcome back. I'm not sure that'll happen with you, but who knows, right?
I don't think I'm going to be
Anyway, welcome back, Andreas.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Pleasure to be here. Mr. President and members of the board and Hank, Dr. Bankster, pleasure. 4 years ago we started this. It's kind of one of those, like, where do you jump in? Where do you go from there? Want to make sure it's interactive. I already have the sense that we're going to kind of be that way tonight, just from the fact that we had questions with the first couple of people presenting their ideas. So that's a good thing. Feel free to jump in. That said, I wanted to kind of back up a little bit, just explain that, yeah, this is early on in the process, and it could go a number of different routes, if you will. There's some methods or opportunities or choices to make in terms of how you move forward, but then a lot of it really is dictated by both the property and the developers or interest in the property. Property is very specific, as you can imagine. So work through our PowerPoint here. So sorry. Fine. Just thank you. Technology is not one of my strongest suits.
We're just so far away from the,
Can we get closer?
maybe we're just too far away from the computer.
Talk from behind all of you. Need to do that. What's that?
It's just not gonna work.
Did you work on it?
Yeah.
She can do it.
I set it all up, but I don't know why it's not.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Oh, hand do. That works.
Yeah.
Very good. I'll just give you the high sign. Hey, I appreciate
Thank you.
that. I really do appreciate it. Okay, so this is an overview of the topics I thought we would cover tonight. And again, jump in with questions and we can go different directions with it. Wanted to go through what your goals are. But certainly, anybody working on this, myself included, wants to make sure that we meet your expectations. So planning goes into that. We need to kind of plan to move forward in a way that at the end result, you're going to be happy, you're going to have what you want. A lot of school districts have leased and sold property over the years, certainly during recessionary times, and since we've told them to slow down and plan. With budget crises, you can imagine there are some that just say, hey, get it sold, fire sale, get it done, we need the money. We don't want you to go that route, especially with a lease with character, property like this. So we're going to take our time and go through and make sure you get what you want out of the end result. We're going to talk a little bit about the process itself and different options with respect to that. Use of proceeds, what you can do with the money coming in. We're going to talk about a waiver process. This is an alternative to the bid hearing process that you would typically think about or hear about. Most property is leased or sold at an auction. You can go through a State Board of Education waiver process that gets you away from an auction and more of a kind of handshake sort of communication, conversation, back and forth negotiation. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Trends, just a little bit of what we've been seeing lately. Overview of the property in general. Some development options, very loosely. Again, not at all to the caliber or to the level that some of the developers might have put out there, but just some ideas, if you will. And then a potential timeline for the actual leasing of the property, not getting it to market or built out or receiving rent, but getting it from now to where you actually have a contract or a deal with a developer or entity. And then next steps, recommend next steps. That's kind of the overview of what's about. So back to goals and expectations. This is the one of what is important to you all. Is it top dollar? Is it timing? Are you in a hurry? I always tell school districts to think about that. I can imagine you're probably not in a huge hurry because you've been looking at this for a long while and you want to get it right. And that's right where we want you to be. That's a good place to be. Are there limitations on the property? Are there things we'll find in deed restrictions and whatnot through title reports? Are there environmental issues, historic issues? You've already touched on that today. Those are things that we want to be thinking about when kind of planning for this, if you will. What you're planning on doing with the proceeds. The good news is with a lease, unlike a sale, you can use those proceeds for what you want. You actually put them into the general fund or designate them into a fund by resolution.
Can I ask a question
Please.
on that? I know at one point there was an extension of a law that allowed you to use the disposition of property for any general funds.
Yeah.
But is that specific to selling, and is this because it's a lease? Do we have to worry about the law ever, restricting our use of the proceeds?
You potentially have to worry in the sense that there could be changes to the law that would affect you. Most typically, when there's changes to the law, you're grandfathered in. You actually have what you have in place, and it's not going to affect you if the law changes. What you're referencing was what we all talked about as being a statute that was supposed to give you some flexibility and allow school districts to sell and arguably lease property and do different things with the funds. The good news, though, is on the lease side, it's different from the school district sales side. When you sell property, the proceeds that come in the door are restricted to capital improvement and maintenance that won't reoccur in a 5-year period. So big ticket items. You have to use it for that. You can't use it for reoccurring operational expense and the like. With leases, that's not the case. There has been some controversy, and I'll get to a slide, but I'm happy to do it now. It's a great question. There's been some controversy over the years where county offices of education have said, hey, if it's a long-term lease, and at one point they started with a 5-year rule, and then said even if it's just a year or more, it should be capital outlay restricted, just like sale proceeds. And we said, well, where exactly in the law do you see that? The law doesn't provide for that. The law says it goes by default to your general fund unless you designate by way of board resolution a different fund. So lease revenue coming in, it's for you to decide what to do with it. If the law changes, we would argue you should be grandfathered in. It's not a home run, but it's most likely that you'd be grandfathered in.
We'll totally rely on that legal
Perfect.
guarantee you just gave us.
You like it? Okay, very good. Yeah, I would be very surprised if the state ever had something that stuck. We did have a long time ago a situation where the state tried to impose on a school district that opted out of the state program. Said we don't want your money. In exchange for not wanting state money, we get to do what we want with the proceeds from 4 different sales.
Wow.
And in that situation, the state later tried to change their mind about what they agreed to, and we fought them and won that. But it's not that they didn't try, the state did try to take the money back. We can work with you. But you should be in good shape here. Just getting through this a little bit, we've got, again, use of proceeds, what entities are involved, the city, what do they have to say about this, historic or otherwise, what's going to be developed or otherwise. The political community issues, we heard about that already today. It's a reality. You're going to want to be proud of what occurs here, and you're going to want something that stands the test of time and is going to be utilized so that you can get rent. It's going to be good for the community and good for you financially. That's the goal. You can build something that ultimately isn't of interest, and you're not going to get the same rents you would have otherwise. So you want to make sure you do flesh that out. That's what that transparency is about. That's what community involvement is about, and it's a good thing. And I've seen this district do that. I've read your reports from other advisory committees, and you do more than most districts, so that's kudos to you.
So in terms of that, I mean, at what point, I know this is jumping way ahead, but let's say we decide to do something and we have someone who says, yes, we're gonna make this area here, retail shop. How, I mean, does the board or does administration, how do you decide, oh, we like that look or we don't like that look, or what are the requirements?
This is one of those wishy-washy answers you don't like from attorneys. So the good news is you have the ability to guide it now in that what you're offering to the development community, those that would come in and offer something for the property, is up to you. Are you offering the frontage right here on Ojai? Are you offering the back lot portions here that could be more akin to residential than retail, mixed use, et cetera, on the front? Are you looking to do the whole site? Those decisions can help guide ultimately where you go, but it's only later where you're going to get to the nitty-gritty. Later you're going to have development partners coming forward and saying, here's what we think would pencil out. And I can tell you, I've had some school districts that, I want to say, bow to community pressure, and that's loaded and jaded. I don't want to quite say it like that, but listen a lot to community input and get a feeling for what needs to occur. I've had a couple school districts that went forward and spent the money themselves to go through an entitlement process through their respective cities, rather than allowing developers to do that, only to get to what ultimately wasn't necessarily marketable. And by the time they went out to bid, people weren't interested in that particular entitlement package. And you had to back up, offer it up for bid, get into escrow with another developer who then changed the entitlement package, closed escrow, home run. So we've had those where if you go too far and you're not sure that that's exactly what truly is marketable, you've kind of spent a lot of money and spent a lot of time. So I'm really pro development help when it comes to that. What does the market bear? You definitely want to hear from your community in that regard, but you want to make sure that there is a burden and an onus on the developers of the world who are going to come forward and spend the time and money to get that built, rather than just going at your own time. The flip side to that, of course, is the less risk, the better the profit, the better the cost, the rent you might be receiving. If you got it right and you spent the money on the front end, a lot of developers are going to say, that's great, I love what you got entitled, we're going to pay you top dollar for that, because they don't have to incur all the costs. But again, if you don't get it right, you can potentially spend a lot of money to ultimately have a different sort of development occur. So you got to be cautious. So
And
yes,
on
you
that
can
kind of a
gauge,
thing-
gauge it now, but
Right.
yeah.
Would the district earn more on a lease if we entitled it ourselves?
Potentially, yes, if you got it right, and if ultimately what you built out was accurate. So what happens, what I've seen, is quite often school districts have one in mind that we just sold, same idea. They thought they knew how many units they could get. They fought with the city, or negotiated, I should say, with the city on how many units and what the development project would look like. Got through the entitlement package, spent $350,000 to get through all of that, if you will. Got through all of that and went out to bid, and we did not receive interest. They said, that's not what we want to build, we want to build something different. Okay. I was not involved during all that time. I was involved early on and said, you might not want to spend the $350,000 until you're in escrow, in a deal with a developer, et cetera. You can share costs or figure that out. Long story short, in that instance, school district went through a waiver process where we got from the state an opportunity to not do a bid again, do a request for proposal where you sit down and negotiate terms and whatnot. Started having conversations, learning more about the property. Realized that it was a good market, very competitive. We went back to bid and had 4 written bids and 8 oral bids. And it ping-ponged back and forth at auction 81 times till we got to a price that was way, way above what we thought we would get for the property. Opened escrow, spent better part of 14 months in escrow while the developer redid that entitlement package. So all the money we had district had spent really didn't benefit, if you will. Wow. Only benefited in the sense that it showed the city was more than willing to do an entitlement package and a zone change, but not exactly what needed to be done. So long story short, developer did their own touch, got more units ultimately than we did, and we were able to close escrow on a really nice price because they got more units. So if you think you could get all the units a developer would get, I think you probably would be able to make all the dollars back out of it. But if you ultimately entitled something that didn't give you the same amount of units or the same amount of development, same square footage, same uses, you might not make the money back. So it's a very loaded question.
Just to be clear, I mean, not all of us are developers.
Sure.
So what you're saying is some school districts, almost on spec, decide to effectively, we're going to design our own package, our own development. We're going to go to the city, we're going to get the necessary approvals for this thing that us fabulous school board members who have these great ideas for buildings or whatever, and then they finish that process, went out to the builders, and the builder's like, yeah, thanks, but no thanks.
What it is you're hiring people who believe that they're in the know and that they have their pulse. People that are working on your behalf with the city to get the entitlement package through. People that are working with everybody, doing the town hall meetings and learning about the project. But these are people that you're paying as consultants, as opposed to a development arm or entity that has skin in the game and actually has their own money up. And that's where the difference lies. If you get it right and those consultants know exactly what you can build out, it might work great. But I keep seeing in situations, not often, but I see where boards move forward with those consultants and realize unless you've got your own money in the game, those developers might not get it right.
But I mean, the board's got a fully developed, architectural plans, the whole deal, and they've done it themselves.
They've done it themselves. It's not as common. It's much more common to have a developer pay for all of that, especially because of things like historic and California Environmental Quality Act and how they tie together. When you deal with that, you have an environmental impact report that can cost you $250,000 arguably, depending on where you're at with the city, the scope of the project, the whole 9 yards. I love it when developers are paying for that during their due diligence period of time. We can talk a little bit about what the documents look like. The other thing real quick just to keep in mind is the effect on your facilities in general. If you're moving away from this site, the net return of what you're going to get needs to be in consideration with, does it cost you to move, does it cost you to operate elsewhere, etc. And you could very well get dollars from a developer to move, but one would argue that would offset the amount of rent. All in, what you receive comes from some source and would come out of rent, at least in the first year or two. And then disposition of other properties. I always remind boards, look at everything as a whole, and I think this district has done that, so you're good there. Please.
We've done that quite a bit.
And they're done that, yeah, very good. Quick overview of the process. You've got 7-11 committee. We're going to talk about that in a minute. You're done. That's the good news there. You did a really good job. No need to resurrect that. You receive a committee report. What I have in mind here would be you would do a resolution that would connect the dots to your prior committee work, sort of tell the story of what has occurred, and then you move forward with declaring the property surplus, offering up for a lease scenario.
I had a question
Yeah.
about that.
Sure.
We've gotten just really rough sketches of what these two proposed developments might be, and there may be more.
Sure.
But my understanding of the one is that a part of the property would be developed. We would maintain operations in another part, but we may lease all or some. And if we're still here, do we have to declare that surplus in order to do a lease?
You would at least declare that portion surplus. You can start with saying, we've got this available. If we retain some, we can change that. It gets very convoluted very quick. There's yet another statute that's joint occupancy, where you can have development or build out of part of your project while you're retaining elsewhere. And the notion there is you get new construction being done on your property for a below fair market value rent, if you will. So we're saying, you'll pay developers to build on our site. We will give you the benefit of below market rent in order to offset that building. We then get the benefit of the title to the buildings. I don't know that you're there. This isn't vacant land where you need to build something. If you needed a new building and there's an opportunity for other types of building, retail, etc., you could build out retail and all your new facilities and have that in a joint occupancy package. Here, though, you've got structures, you've got space, and so I don't really see you going that route. I think you're better off declaring the property surplus and then deciding in the ultimate deal whether or not you retain a portion for yourself or not.
Plus, that former is probably not as attractive to developers.
Correct, yeah. It can be depending on the lease terms, but you have to sit down and walk through why you gotta do what you do, and it can only be 66 years, not 99 years, and here's why the statute says that, and it could be a little convoluted. Not that typical. We've had a district do it, and again, vacant land. They ended up with 4 acres built out for them, 6 that was retail, and they're happy to have that 6 be retail. At some point, years down the road, they'll get the 6 back, but the 4 was built out for free. But here, I think you're in a different place because you already have space. You don't have something needed in terms of a building for your property. So I think you're better off with the surplus property route. Okay, 2/3 vote of a resolution to declare property surplus. That's just one of those legal things. You send out some notices. It's pretty straightforward. These are notices to public agencies. Very few in the lease world. On the sale world, it's a long host of everything. UC system, Cal State system, Department of General Services of the state of California in general, it goes on and on and on. Here you won't have too much of that. We'll talk about it just a little bit. Then ultimately you hold an auction. You do a public bid auction to receive bids on what people want to come in and build on your property.
Even for lease?
Even for lease. Or you have to go get a waiver from the state board of eds, and we talk about both of those sort of front runner options. Auction or waiver, which is a request for proposal. The two I want you to be thinking in terms of the front runners, if you will. Thank you. Okay, real quick, we touched on it. No need to reconvene your committee. The conditions of this situation have not changed materially in any way. So what your committee looked at just years ago, 4 years back, nothing's really changed. Okay? So it's a big issue. Nothing in the law says that a committee recommendation is good for 2 or 4 or 6 years or 8 years. But what we look to is, would that committee have made a similar recommendation or not? I think obviously the answer here is yeah. And more importantly, you did just recently have a 7-11 committee meet for the purposes of school closure issues. and I've read that report. They looked at this property and said move forward. So you're fine. You're 100% there. You don't have to deal with committee issues at this point. Thank you.
Can I ask a question too? About the
Sure.
2/3 vote?
Yeah.
So we're 5, so we have to have 4 votes.
Yeah, you have to have, that's right.
Is that iterative? I mean, is it just one vote and then whatever happens thereafter is just agreed upon kind of in caucus, or is it iterative as we go along? We have to keep voting on it.
That is a great question. It's for the purposes of declaring it surplus and saying we no longer need this property should a deal get done. It's the one time. You just need that 2/3 vote. After that, say we get down the road to an auction or a request for proposal process with developers, the choosing of that deal at that time would simply be a majority, simple majority. So then you're down to 3. Okay. 4 right out of the gates, 3 down the road. Short answer to that. So board resolution. This is the next step, if you will, because you're done with your committee report. The next step would be accept the report. And again, I noted you would kind of go through and tell the story of what the committee has done. Declare it surplus. Authorize me sending out some notices to the world that we're doing this. Set some minimum terms. This is a little hard on a lease, a lot easier on a sale, where you say, here's the price, here's the close of escrow and deposit structure, right? A little hard on lease. But the notion is before you go out to just anybody in the community, or I should say agencies, you want to know you're not just giving it away. You have some basics. You have some terms or rent that you think you want to get. We can set that through appraisal. We'll talk about that a little bit. So some terms in there. And then, yeah, the notice that we're going to go do good faith negotiations with the community. We tell the world, it's a newspaper publication, etc. And really what it does is it just gears us up for a bid hearing. In that resolution, you can also decide if you want to hire a broker. Many school districts don't go with a broker when leasing and or selling property. Most don't on sale. With lease, it's at least 50-50. There might even be a leaning towards using a broker. The notion is you, on your own, wouldn't be listing it on multiple listing services, LoopNet, and all these that show properties available. My take on that is it's very driven by statute. And while there's some nuance and art to it, the law is the law. And so I believe that you can get benefit from brokers showing it and talking about your property, but you might want to put them on more of a flat fee basis as opposed to a commission basis if you believe that there's still enough skin in the game to incentivize that broker. I just wouldn't want you to pay full bore 2 or 3% on something if it's a limited role. And we're happy to talk with brokers about what the broker would do. He or she would do X, Y, and Z, and my firm would do the legal work and keep it simple that way. The idea is to not spend money in a duplicative manner. So you can put that in your book. Thank you. No problem at all. So statutory notices. Again, if you're dealing with sale, there's a ton. With lease, not so much. And it really depends on what type of property you're leasing. Coming in here today, I have an assumption that you'd likely look at most of the property or a portion of the property, but the portion that you're leasing, you're just saying, development community, tell us what you can do with the property. It could be, however, that you ultimately say, you know what, no, we want to lease it as classroom space. If you do that, there are requirements and notices we'd have to send out. So it's an issue. If you're saying no for childcare services and people that would come in contracting entities for childcare services, we'd have to send out notices to a host of people there, or entities there. Or then lastly, if this is Naylor Act property. Naylor Act property is property that's been used as open space and recreational purposes for 8 years continuously. So the skate park area, if you were to deal with that acreage, that would be Naylor Act property. Whereas the rest, I can't imagine would be, because this is not being used for recreational purposes. When I looked at this property, I was looking at about 7.5 acres. That excluded the skate park. Okay? So if we were talking about that 7.5 acres and you're looking to lease all of it or a portion of it, it wouldn't trigger the Naylor Act. And so you don't have to send notices to the city, the county, and Parks and Recs. Those are the entities that would otherwise get notice that you have Naylor Act property. The reason that's important is Naylor Act property comes at a discount. If you're offering property that's been recreational in place, as long as an entity that has a Naylor Act right is coming forward and is going to keep it open space, they get to get that property. There's a formula, but ultimately, for the most part, it boils down to basically 25 cents on the dollar for 30% of the land. The other 70% of the land is fair market value, but there's a discount on 30% of the land. if, again, you're triggering that park space over there, it could apply. Otherwise, it doesn't. So I didn't want to come here and say there aren't that many notices to send out without knowing what acreage we were going to actually lease. But if it's truly just the 7.5 acres or frontage or the back portions, some combination or portion of 7.5 acres, these aren't going to apply. You're going to have very, very little by way of notices going on.
We do have the preschool. Does that?
It won't.
count?
Yeah.
It doesn't count.
No, it's not open, as far as I know, it's not open space that others are using.
No, I'm just reading
Oh.
childcare.
So if you're going to lease it for the purposes of childcare,
Okay.
then you're back to that. And those entities, and it's a host, even schools and neighboring schools and private schools could come in. Similarly, if you're going to say we have classroom space and we're making classroom space available, but you can't develop it, you have to keep it classroom space, now you have to go to your special education local planning area, the county office, and give it to them at direct cost. You're not even making money on it. Those aren't going to apply here, best I can tell. But I didn't want you to think that I was making a foregone conclusion that I know what you wanted to do with your property, so I put it in your inclusive. Okay. Charter school rights, as you know, charter schools have rights as a priority for comparable facilities if there's 80 in-district students. So that's just something I always mention that would come into play and could foul the notion of proceeding with a lease arrangement if you didn't have a place to put them elsewhere.
And that's 80 in-district classroom-based program, right?
Correct. Thank you.
So independent study wouldn't
Independent study.
have the same rights.
Could you hit that again, because that's pretty important.
It's just it's 80 in-district students that are classroom-based here, not the independent study students. I think Andy asked me that. We went to our charter specialist and got that answer from him.
Right.
But in terms of a charter that wants to relocate, I mean, if they've already got space, then we don't have to, this doesn't come into play. It's only the charter that's needing space?
Needing space and putting you on notice by November 1st that they need the space, and you can't put them elsewhere. There's nothing that says they have to have any particular space, it just has to be comparable, the facilities you're providing to your other students. So if you were able to show a place, I mean, there are some school districts that want to move forward with a development of a project or sale of land so much that they've leased space elsewhere for charter schools to keep free the one that they're looking to sell or lease.
And they would have to have at least 80 students.
Yeah.
And
In
we
a classroom.
don't charge that.
Yeah.
In district.
It'd be, yeah,
In-district.
80 ADA,
80A.
in district in a classroom-based program. So, for instance, the charter school that's, closest to us, Valley Oak Charter, has a 75 student max. Only about 50 are coming from in district, and it's not a classroom-based program. So all of those criteria they miss.
If there were a problem, it would be a charter we don't know about yet.
Correct.
That's
Correct.
right. We put you on notice in time, and you couldn't put them elsewhere.
When you say in time,
November.
November of when?
November 1st of any given year.
Of the year in which you
Correct.
decide.
So they would have to, if it's available now, and they said, hey, we're here, we've got these 80 students that can come your way, and you're on notice. Now you've got to go find them for that coming year, if they're truly a charter here, and been approved and whatnot, a charter, you'd have to house them. And the question is then, where? Do you have elsewhere that you can house them? Or not? Wouldn't want you to get rid of something that you would ultimately have a need for. It goes back to, is it truly surplus property or not?
Thanks.
Very good. Okay, and then there's one caveat in the statutes that talk about with lease. It's a little bit, I can make the argument it applies to sale, not lease, but a conservative approach is to actually make it available to governmental entities for affordable housing. Usually they're not interested at all, send a notice. What you might have with respect to affordable housing is any developer moving forward, if they're doing a residential project, you could have some push from the city to make sure some portion's affordable. I have one right now where the city's making very clear they want 20% of the units to be affordable housing units. That would result in less dollars to the project, which means less dollars to you. Okay? But you would still have a project that's 80% market rate and 20% affordable. And ultimately that might end up around 10% on that deal. It's just something that we're throwing around and working through. We'll talk a little bit about those structures of deals in just a moment. Very good. Types of process. Lisa's covered this just in my comments. Again, classroom space versus that Naylor Act, et cetera, et cetera. Here, what I think you've got is 4. Yes, you've got classroom space, but unless you're leasing it as classroom space, you're really just dealing with improved property. Property that's been improved, it's not vacant. And here, you don't have all those notices to send out, so that's a good. Thank you. Bid hearing. This is the fun part. In a perfect world, you are dealing with something simple like a purchase and sale agreement and you're selling property. You don't have a perfect world in that you have a development project type property. Property where it's not just leasing what you have, but leasing it for the opportunity for somebody to come in and develop it to get you your ground rent. In the sale scenario, just so you can kind of understand the difference, we would go forward with a public hearing, an auction, where we literally stand there with a gavel and conduct an auction and see what we have in both in written and in oral bids. We open the bids, read out loud what the numbers are. We then call for oral bids, and both for sale and lease, you're looking at for your first oral bid, it has to be 5% higher than the highest written bid. So that's the golden part. You're like, okay, I want to get to that 5%. I want to at least get an oral bid that comes in higher than, by 5%, the written bid. And hopefully then you're off and running, you got a lot of oral bids going back and forth. We see that a lot with sales. Because with sales, what we send out in preparation for the auction is what we call the bid package. Applies to leases. But in a sale bid package, when we send it out, it's here's notice of bid hearing. Here's the rules and how we're going to conduct a bid. Here's information, title report, things about the property, and ultimately a purchase and sale agreement. This is the document that you're telling bidders would be the document they're going to open escrow with, okay? And they know how much the deposits will be, what the rights and obligations of the parties are going to be. They see that before they bid. The reason I stress that is we do that package with a minimum price. If people come in at auction and give the district an offer that is at least at that minimum price, and they're not changing any material terms, you have a true offer. It's an offer, okay? And you have to take the highest offer you receive at that auction, or you can reject them all. So you can always choose just to walk away and say, I don't like the results. But the highest one coming in would be where you accept it. The caveat to that, and again, we're talking sale here, and then I'll show you the difference. The caveat to that is you can get counteroffers, okay? Counteroffers are situations where people come in and they say, I've looked through everything, here's my offer, and it's either below the minimum price, or sometimes far higher, but different terms. They're saying, you said I could have a year to close escrow. I need 18 months to close escrow because I have to get through the city process, entitlements and whatnot. And you want $500,000 as a deposit. I'm going to give you $250,000, not $500,000 as a deposit. And those sorts of material terms. You can pick and choose among counteroffers because there's no way to say which one's high because they have different terms. If you don't have a true offer. If you have a true offer, you got to take the true offer or reject all. Follow? So counteroffers are great. They can be kind of fun and really nice deals if you have a little time, a little flexibility. But you can't pick and choose among those at all. You can't even want to choose one. You can't touch it if you have a true offer. Easy on the sales side to figure all that out. On the lease side, there's two types. One would be you have an elementary school, it's been closed for a long time, you lease it, you know a private school might come in and lease it for you for X amount of dollars. Straightforward lease, just like the explanation I gave you on sale, you might get to a true offer where they're not changing the lease terms. Here's the price, here's the lease, we're done. It's easy to accept something like that. With a development ground lease scenario, no matter how good we think we might be, I'm never going to be able to draft a ground lease, an option agreement, and a ground lease agreement, and stick it in a bid package and have developers come forward without making a whole host of changes, because they're going to have to make the project their own. Mm-hmm. And so, almost by definition, you're looking at a counteroffer scenario, because they're going to change material terms, what's in that bid package. So I know that's a lot to throw out there, but the reason I say all that is, yes, technically the law allows and says you've got to go through an auction process. But I've watched over the years where I can't get through an auction process, one auction done with a true offer on a ground lease, because it's going to be counteroffers. So I say that to say the good news will be you might have more than one counteroffer. These are changes to the agreement that you can then pick and choose among them. And that'll put you in the situation of choosing among what you've heard from developers that day, in writing, in their auction, thinking back what you've learned between now and then from the community, the city, and elsewhere, which deal do you like? And you might then be put to the test to say, which deal would you choose? Would you go with option A, which might be more money or less money, but different terms, different type of development, or option B or option C, etc. Okay? I'll tell you that one way to do this also is to do the auction, hear that information. Ultimately, you may reject all and take another bite at the apple where you hone in on what you think really might be developable and you put that in a lease and you put that out on the street again and do a second auction. Because you want the benefit of the auction that has the competition, but you also don't want to give short shrift to the developers who are saying, here's what I can build. And that's what comes out of their counteroffers. So I know that's a mouthful, but that's where it really, rubber meets the road. And you're really looking at how much can you get for your property, what type of project will it be, is it something the district can get behind, that the community can get behind, and the good news is in that counteroffer scenario, you have your ability to choose among them. It's not just the #1 price issue or the #1. It's assuming there's no straight offer with no changes, you're going to be able to pick and choose among them. So
It would seem to me you could thwart the sort of requirement of taking a true offer by making your proposal inherently absurd enough that you'll only get counteroffers.
Yes, you could always put a bid package out that is so poor that you're going to have people make material changes to your document, or a price that is so lofty that nobody can ever come near it, and so you're only going to get counteroffers. I like very much to set a reasonable number and a reasonable document and put that out, because you're flagging to the world, this is at least at a minimum, the floor, if you will, what the board's looking to accept. And it keeps things very legitimate and people in the right ballpark, rather than getting all sorts of numbers all over the place. When we go through a process that's waiver, where you're not doing the auction, I've seen from, we'll give you 100,000 a year to we'll give you 800,000 a year, and everything in between. And it doesn't give a real cohesive sense of 8 different deals. They're just all over the place. So I do like putting out on the street a package that ultimately, in a good day, you'd all accept it if you got it. Right?
But the package that we could put out is going to be, it could be merely financial, in which case we would have no control over the type of project, or something else that I guess is probably what drives these other school districts to do some entitling, because they want to put something out there that actually is more along the lines of what they like to see.
Sure. Most don't go through the expense and time of entitlement. Most actually just see what they get in. They take a separate or second bite at the apple at auction if necessary, or they seek a waiver. And that's the next step. I'll talk to you about waiver. I think it'll get you kind of where I'm at with a ground lease. If this was a lease where you're not doing a development, I would say auction's great. Competition's great. We've had great results. But with the development arm or element to what we're dealing with here, the process of getting a waiver from the State Board of Ed will circumvent the auction, and you can do both simultaneously, which is what I think. There's no real cost to it. It's parallel tracks. I'm going to talk about that real quick. I think it'll make some sense. Okay, I want to talk about waiver. Right where we're at. So what you just heard is the auction process. Okay, the state or the education code allows for you to waive that process. We call it the surplus property process, where you get to an auction. You can waive that. The only thing you can't waive is a handful of notices that you have to send out and how you use the proceeds. It really doesn't matter to you. It would matter on the sales side if you wanted to use your proceeds for whatever you wanted, not have it be capital outlay only. There, the state would say you can't waive that. It's got to be capital outlay, so you can't get out from that. Other than that, you can get out from everything, including Naylor Act. You can get out from all sorts of stuff with waiver. In order to do waiver, you have to go to your bargaining units, tell them that you're doing it. They don't need to agree. You just have to check in with them, check a box that you talk to them. You have to get your advisory committee to say, yeah, waiver's fine with us. It's one meeting, check a box, done. You conduct a public hearing here at the board to say we're going to seek a waiver from the State Board of Ed.
Can we go back to that? So we would have to reconvene the 7-11 committee?
For that one meeting to say we're fine with waiver. We're still fine with what we saw in that report that said go ahead with the property.
Okay. Do they have to be the same people or different people?
No, it could be any current iteration of what you've got. But hopefully you could be your 7-11 committee that just disbanded.
I think even the old committee, most of them are.
Are they still? Okay, very good. That would be nice to be able to do that, sure. So you can, you do that. You do a public hearing, just notifying the world that you're looking for the waiver. And then you go through, basically now it's changed to an online submission or application with the State Board of Ed. The good news is they've got to give it to you unless they can show some jeopardy to your pupils or some increase to their costs. I've never not obtained a waiver. I've never had an instance where we were not able to get a waiver. It's 6 months worth of time because you got to get through the State Board of Ed. But it doesn't really cost you much. It's a board resolution, it's a hearing. I don't even need to be here for that hearing. It's nothing much to it. We submit it and wait. The last prong here, this unofficial requirement, is, I think, the important issue. the State Board of Ed has kind of done an overlay in this world, if you will, to say we don't like districts as landlords. It's just like a policy. Nothing in the law says you can't be a landlord or have a property that's generating income. But they said, yeah, we're not real wild about it, and we don't want you to just waive and do what you want and pick a developer. So they want to keep it competitive still. So they have, and again, it's not founded in law, but they have said that their requirements are that you do a request for proposal. Very similar, if you will, to an auction. But rather than on auction day, hearing about the oral and written bids and declaring one later that day or later, the approved, here you can go back to those that are offering and do the negotiation. So you're essentially opening requests for proposals before a board meeting, trying to rank them, and I'll bring them to you. Staff, administration will bring them to you and say, here's what we received, here are the proposals. Direction from the board, direction from the board to go back to X, Y, and Z, or just X developer, and see if we've got a meeting of the minds and can we negotiate a deal. So rather than having the lease agreement in the bid package, you can offer it up for guidance in a request for proposal package, but they don't have to worry about counteroffers or non-counteroffers. They can come in and say, I think I know what the district's looking at. Here's what we want to do. Here are the basic terms. We have a term sheet, 3 pages or 4 pages of all the terms of a deal. And we come back to you and say, does that make good sense? And you're gonna say, yeah, this one sounds better than that one for the following reasons. We state those out loud. One of the requirements is to declare, or to say what they all are, and then just basically say why is it most beneficial? Why is X versus Y or Z the most beneficial for the district at that time? We state that for the record. That gets us green light to go forward and try to negotiate that deal. Once the deal's done, I get to come back to you, and then we daylight it, and you just have to have it open to the world to see between 30 and 60 days before you actually ink the deal. That's it. So you're telling the world this is the final deal. It gives you an opportunity to chime in, right? And that's it. So it's not in the law. I know there's a lot. I can get all chapter and verse. I've got summaries you wouldn't believe. So
yeah, he does actually.
There's just so much to this, and I apologize. So long story short, that process to follow, it sounds unwieldy. It's really fairly simple, and we can follow that while we're moving forward towards an auction. So that if an auction comes and you don't get where you want to be, you think you learn a lot and see the competition in the room, you can still come back to the waiver process. You can do them within a month of each other, whatever you want. So concurrent paths.
So what if you choose one of these, the proposal you've offered up for observation, and then they change their mind or the board changes its mind? You decide to go with number 2.
You can always do number 2. So you say number 1 is one, this is why we like it. You try to negotiate the deal. We've had situations where we can't come to terms.
Okay.
And I get to say, that's not what you said in the proposal. We were fine with that term in the proposal, and what you're changing is a material change to the proposal.
Okay.
We then come back to the next one through the board to say the next.
So we have to be really careful with the details.
Correct.
Yeah.
You can also rank them and say, we received 6, 4 we don't like, 2 we like, number 1 and number 2 in that order.
Mm-hmm.
We go try to cut a deal with number 1. If we can't, we can go to number 2 and then come back to you.
And that's best case scenario, actually,
Yeah.
because then number 1's more likely to agree.
Yes.
So.
In any of this, it's always competition that helps drive it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. An auction's the same way. If you get a great result at auction, if you don't have a number 2 that's close to it, you might not end up with that final deal. And that's hard. They'll just fall out and not proceed because they feel like, who else is out there? So we do like to push and have competition, and that's why the auction is nice. Mm-hmm. I've had a lot of developers over the years say, I know I'm going to get this. I know I'm the only game in town. I know the city believes that my project's going to make great sense, and I will be the strong bid. And they show up, and 3 people are higher than them, and their head spins. They're like, whoa, there's real attractive property. We just did one recently where we started at 16 and ended up at 22 million, and everything in between, and it just kept on going and going.
Wow.
Yeah, it was neat.
Okay. Is the standard for most beneficial an objective one, or is it purely subjective?
It's subjective. Obviously, we would want it to be reasonably, a reasonable subjective standard. So yeah, it's subjective, but you just need to explain why it's most beneficial. I've had some school districts say, this is a known commodity, this entity has been here, has been working with the city, they're of like mind when it comes to how many units or the lot size for these residential units, etc. Whereas this other one, while it's more money, they think they're going to be able to get, quarter acre lots. It's never going to happen, and you can make whatever determination is sound and reasonable.
Sorry, go ahead.
That is, that's huge in this city, right?
Sure.
I mean, if we we have a developer and they say, oh, you know, a 40-room something or a 40-unit thing, and we say, that looks great. And the city has a planning commission that might say, oh, no, you can't do more than 10. I mean, that could just blow the whole deal.
Yeah, that's right. So what you're looking for is an offer that you think could stand the test of time and get through the entire process. When you are out there trying to spend the money to get an entitled package, right? If you get it wrong, it's on your dime. What we try to set up is that the developers coming forward are going to be spending their own money through their entitlement process and their due diligence to review the property. And if they get it wrong, it's their money, so they want to get it right. They're not going to come in and say, I can build out 100 units when it might only be 30 units. You know, and they're going to know that and hopefully spend money wisely. We have a deal recently where the prices came in higher than expected. It was a great result through a waiver process on a ground lease. And it's an option agreement. It gives them a year's time to get through an entitlement package, decide, you know, that everything's the way they want it, and then they operate under a ground lease. We've already negotiated that. We get rent. And in that instance, it was $613,000 a year rent starting. Big property, nice. They want 120 units on this whole site. It's basically 25 units per acre. And that's the stretch, that's a lot. It's a multifamily apartment complex, 25 units per acre is a lot. So the board still accepted it, knew that that might be too much of a reach, but also understands that they will amend that deal if they can't get 25. Say they get 20 units per acre, we might end up with 80% of that base rent amount. But we still have a deal for upwards of 99 years. We have rent increases, we know all the terms, we just don't know the very first number. In the event that they get all of their units, and it's 25 units to an acre, we'll get 613 and it goes off from there and it gets to millions within years, or over $1 million within years. But if they don't, we know they're gonna come back and say either I have to drop out of this deal or I need to do an amendment. And you're by law allowed to do that. You're allowed to say, you know what, I get it. You didn't come back and nibble on this deal and change the terms because of something that you failed to do. You didn't ignore affordable housing. You didn't ignore costs. You didn't. If they come to you and say, these are all these things that I didn't know, and we can look at it and say, how did you not know that? These are regular costs. You might not accept that amendment. But if they come to you and say, we've done everything we can to get 25 units an acre, and we're at 20, we need an 80% reduction in rent, you might very well want to take that deal still. So a lot goes into that. Real quick, I don't need to go on here. I already told you proceeds are for you to put into your general fund or direct them otherwise. And I just had a slide here, but we already covered it. Trends. We are seeing now more leases. We have a handful of districts that are doing leases on existing buildings, and now even a couple more that are doing leases like this, where it's a ground lease option. They used to be few and far between. We're seeing an uptick in that regard. We're also seeing exchange arrangements, where you're exchanging your property for something else elsewhere. You become a landlord of a different property. Here, I think it's different. You want to retain this land. You don't want to exchange it, so it's not good for you. But I'm just seeing that as kind of a trend. I'm also seeing people taking us on a recommendation that you go that concurrent path with waiver and sale scenario. Because it's becoming hard to get through an auction on anything lease related, not sale but lease, the waiver will give you a little bit more flexibility. But we don't want to abandon the auction process because it can be quite competitive. It's nice to see what comes of that. Pretty simple to run together. Use of brokers, we chatted about that. We're seeing more of that as a trend. Again, be thoughtful about your dollars. And then bid results have been good. We've had an uptrend in the market, if you will, and especially in school district areas where you are seen as dissimilar property that you don't see elsewhere. Size-wise, you know, built-out communities where all of a sudden you've got for an infill development, you can put 100 homes on what used to be an elementary school that's been closed for 20 years. You don't find that kind of 14 acres elsewhere in that district. Those things can go for a break. Good. I'll round it out here. Real quick, overview of your property. Certainly have not done what a developer or what we would do if you want to proceed. But what I know of the property, you're looking at about 7.5 acres. You've got this frontage, quite nice. You've got back parcels, again, quite nice. The back parcels, in I think an appraiser's mind, would be geared to that multifamily apartment or residential unit kind of idea, whereas frontage could be mixed use or other. Could be from everything you've heard in the 2 proposals that you've received. Those are those informal proposals that you've got from developers. You're free to do that. You just can't select one of those yet without going through the process. Okay, so it's great to have the information. It's great to partner with people and get those ideas out on the table. It's currently zoned as public, quasi-public. That means governmental and public facility buildings. You could do here in Ojai, I believe you can do a restaurant with a conditional use permit, but you're not going to be able to do apartments. You're not going to be able to do hotel unless you go through a full-blown zone change. You're going to have to actually do a general plan amendment through the city and a zone designation, zoning change designation.
We did an overlay with the city that, I think 3 years ago, the city did called in a consultant to find out where potentially affordable housing could be constructed, and they did an overlay on our property out here. Does that help us in the long run?
Yeah, certainly it can, but it depends. It depends on what they're looking to do. If the overlay is, hey, we've decided that your area is going to be where all affordable housing will go, it'll drive the rent value down overall. If you have a mix where you have a percentage of affordable and otherwise for-profit area, that's par for the course. Home run when it comes to rent would be that it's all market value and then affordable, because then you get more rents coming in the door.
Yeah.
But it's also not just how much, but how much in the world we live in. And so if there is a reality that there's going to be some affordable, then the question is what is reasonable?
Yeah.
And should it be borne on your shoulders alone to have all of it on one spot or not?
Okay.
If it's going to be more than the 20%, I would imagine it wouldn't be a developer coming in doing a for-profit or market rate deal. It would be, if it's going to be all that, it's going to be somebody that does the tax credits and the whole 9 yards that will come in to develop it that way.
Okay.
Andreas, can you talk a little bit more about that, the general plan work with the city?
Yeah.
I mean, without trying to predict what would happen here, if you just reflect a little bit on small school districts and small cities where there's a coterminous kind of relationship, sort of one, I mean, in our case, the city's only 1/3 of our school district, okay, but we're in it.
Yeah.
So when you're dealing in small entities of that type, what does the general plan process look like? How do you get to the end of the process from the beginning?
Gotcha. That would be the next slide, if you would, please.
As part of that, an adjunct to that question is, since the school district answers to the state, what are the requirements under SEQA, or can you avoid some requirements under SEQA?
No. Typically no. So in a situation like this, it's not, school districts have the ability to get out from under some city zoning. Okay, quite a bit, if it's classroom space related issues. So if you have a high school here, it's for classroom space needs, and the city wants to tell you what you can do with your leaf blowers or advertising.
For example.
I didn't know that.
Hypothetical.
Swear to you, I didn't
Not
know
that they've ever.
I truly did not know that.
Did you really not know that? Oh my God. Oh.
Advertisement, setbacks from roads, all sorts of things. You have the unfettered ability to overrule that by putting them on notice that you've overruled it by board action. Okay. That doesn't apply to you. What will apply to you?
Wait a minute, you just said that doesn't apply to us.
I truly didn't know that. That's interesting. What will apply to you, though, and what you can't overrule, okay, is grading and traffic considerations. Because there's the best interest that the city has traffic and grading fixed. And you can't just be the fly in the ointment.
Yeah.
Okay. So a lot of zoning you can get out from under, but no, we still have to comply with the California Environmental Quality Act. Okay. You're going to have to show, and a study will be done, this should be, again, on the developer's dime, not yours if you're in a deal. They're going to go to the city with an application to change the zoning, to do a general plan amendment to allow for a zone change, to get it from public, quasi-public to multifamily residential or mixed-use retail or a combination of whatever it might be. They're going to submit that package. Okay.
The developer would do that.
Typically speaking, again, you can do it, and some districts will spend the money to do that with consultants' help, and it's pricey. Or you can have a developer do that. They again have the option. You have a ground lease. You know what the terms will be if they get through their process, and you know the rent is going to be X amount on the commencement date, increases, what have you.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but
please.
have you seen a case where a developer works with the school district to let us know what they need, and then the school district works with the city to get the approvals?
Informally, where they're saying this
Right.
is ultimately, but never one where we were in a deal and the district fronted the money.
But informally?
Informally,
Does that work?
but the informal is, it's open, everybody hears it, and you ultimately can't choose that developer. You're going to get the developer in a final deal. I've never been in a deal where you've chosen the developer, but then the district's putting all the money up. Once you're in the deal, I think it's time then to say to the developers, hey, you're in this business. We will certainly, be involved and supportive and tell the city we really want this deal to go through. But that's it. Other than that, it's really a developer who's coming in and saying to the world, this is the package. And under the California Environmental Quality Act, here's the traffic considerations. We've got a traffic study. Here's how it's going to apply. Here's how the city will hear. The city will conduct public hearings, planning commission, etc. They might very well do historic work. They will they will be the lead agency for CEQA purposes, California Environmental Quality Act. The district wouldn't be the lead agency. We'd allow them to run through the city, do their zone change and the like. If it were challenged, the challenge would be borne by the developer. Those costs would be borne by the developer. That's why you have to give them time on the front end. And we're going to talk about time in a minute, and it gets where it gets a little ugly, because it takes a long time to do these things. But long story short, yeah, you're going to do a general plan amendment. You're going to change the zoning. Okay? You might feel easier than those two. Lot split issues. There's two back lots, one frontage lot. You might split differently or do an adjustment, a lot line adjustment, to make it one parcel for financing reasons or others. And I think you heard about a little bit of that today. California Environmental Quality Act. They could do this much or this much. You can start with hopefully what we call mitigated negative declaration. It's not as convoluted as an environmental impact report. It's bigger and more. Not getting into all those details. It can trigger more with things like historic and whatnot. You would have to determine whether or not you believe a historic designation was accurate. Some districts have said, yeah, okay, it is historic. Others have said, no, it's not. There needs to be a character and quality to what we're doing, but it doesn't meet the criteria upon which it should be designated and be on registries, both state and federal registries. So you can fight at the local, state, and federal side of all of that. It's sometimes an uphill battle. It's not unheard of to win. We had one recently where we had it's quite interesting actually, we had a city come out swinging saying that a tennis center was historic. And we said these are portable buildings, modular buildings that were on this site since the 50s. They're modular. It's not historic in nature, and we fought for quite a while. We won that battle, and it was a good result, if you will. Here, the win might not be is it or isn't it. It could very well be developer talking with the city to say what would be reasonable. Do you have the facade and frontage that meets the character and keeps what you're looking for, but you're not to the point of being limited to where you can't change a window or can't make changes that would otherwise drive costs.
I think that's really important. And just with Andra here is our local newspaper writer.
Sure.
So I'm going to try to characterize very quickly where I think we are, okay, on this issue of historic preservation, very quickly. The historic preservation, or the committee that deals with this, as you just referred to, already took the initiative, right, to forward the idea that committee thinks, commission thinks that we are quite eligible for historic landmark preservation, okay? The city accepted that, put money in the budget to continue to work on it. Then, as Thane reported earlier, we had a meeting a June ago, where it was a combined group of a fairly new board, so June of 2015, okay. And the city council, and we talked about intent, authority. The attorney for the city was there. The sum of all that was that I think there was a consensus among the then city council members, I guess they're also there, that the city council would never do that to us, right? Sure. That we would work together. I've had some conversations since then with the now former city manager, a little bit with the new city manager, and I think that hasn't really changed. But I think there's this sort of amorphous view out there about, who may do what to whom under what circumstances, what reaction we could have if we disagreed. And I just think this would be a good time in public with you here for you to discuss, either by your experience or just in general, how does that play out? I'm not saying there'll be a disagreement, but there could be. Is that fair? Is that a fair
Well, has
summary.
there ever not been a
No, no.
disagreement?
Well, we don't have that many issues with the city. We really don't.
No,
you
I
know?
just mean generally.
Oh, whatever,
Yeah,
okay.
right.
Anyway, my point is, I think it might be good for that to be clarified. You know, who has authority to make decisions along the way, final decision? And you stated in your written responses to some questions that I asked, like you said, once it gets to the state level, that becomes pretty hard, right? So it
does.
seems to me that
changes
it's
some things.
incumbent upon a school board and a city to work together, right, to try to reach agreement
Yes.
before it gets to that point, right?
And I should have said, I think we do have an excellent
Yeah, we
relationship.
do. No, we
with the
do.
city.
No,
Appreciate that. And
there's
that's good.
there's no acrimony. It's
Yeah.
just, you know, we're sort of in this limbo state here, and now that we're seriously looking at this, I think it's important to clarify that.
There are district
Get it
board-
out of the way.
Yeah.
There's personalities of some school district boards where it's all top dollar, we're gonna get it done for good reasons. We need the money, we can't have limitations, and they're gonna push. There are others where I've seen, like this district, where you've done a lot, and you've gone out through advisory committees, and you've been pretty transparent, in my opinion. You've really done a lot on just school closure alone. I just watched some of that, I just thought, wow, that's above and beyond, if you will. So that's good. And there are consultants that will do the scorched earth fight, or can we get a deal done? We're in deal-making mode. There's no reason to not be. There's no reason to not extend the olive branch and say, the development community is what drives this. The property character and what development you can put on the property is what drives it. So but neither side, city or this school district, should be looking to put up impediments to that if we all agree that we're moving down the road where we're having community involvement, we think we know where we're headed with the development of the property, getting a bunch of opinions about the development and what ultimately is going to be here. Who's the end user? What's the end development going to look like? If there's support for that, things like the historic issue can be a lot more simple. Same thing goes for the California Environmental Quality Act. People get to sue under the California Environmental Quality Act on environmental grounds, where they say there's a problem, you're causing a significant impact to the environment, for example. When I see people challenging under CEQA, it's because they don't like the project. It has nothing to do with the environment. Historic can be that way. It can be a tool where some people in the community might say, we're going to slow down this process by using the historic car.
Right.
Okay? And so the goal is to make sure that it's collaborative. You're looking at what a zone change would look like, what you would build, what developers want to build, and explaining the process, how you're going to choose. We're going to go through an auction. It's going to be above board. Everybody gets to see it. We're going to do a waiver so we can pick and choose and negotiate and hone in on something that works. But yes, ultimately, if the city commission, then to the city council, decides that it's historic, you have rights under the municipal code to challenge. And I haven't looked at Ohio's. I've looked at the one that I mentioned recently on the tennis center. There was an appeal process and whatnot, and we explained how there were impediments to our contractual deal, and how when we believed legally that their designation as such would cause us financial harm, there are issues and ramifications to the city trying to cause us financial harm. So we're not there yet. I haven't analyzed this. I don't know. You know, the other caveat to this is, again, while thinking about transparency and that collaborative approach to make sure everybody knows what we're trying to accomplish, so you're not looking for the boogeyman behind the corner and having to use CEQA or historic as a card, as a tool. While we're doing that, we still have the right as a district to be well-informed and to strategize to get the value, okay? So a lot of what I do gets to be done in open session, but luckily a lot of what anybody's selling or buying property, you get to do it in closed session. So you have the real property negotiation, exception to the Brown Act. We get to talk about price in terms of payment issues. You also get to go in under anticipated litigation. If you think that there's, for example, an historic or a CEQA challenge afoot, you can talk about that in closed session. So our goal is to have a really nice balance where everybody's involved, people know what we're doing, there's full transparency, but you're not strategizing in open session, and you're not talking about what you may or may not do with either the city or the developers in open session 100% of the time. So I don't say that to suggest, you know, we're gonna do this closed door strategizing session, but I get to say, well, of course, in any negotiation, some of that has to be below closed doors. So yeah, it's nice to set the stage to say we have rights, just like the city when it comes to historic. We think the answer is that effort on both sides with developers running the show, pushing the charge, if you will, for a zone change designation, and why, if we keep enough character that's historic, We don't need to get to a preservation status where you literally are limited to what you can build and take less dollars.
That was why I asked the question. I mean, you already heard from Jonas and Ted, that's sort of where their mind is now, right? And I suspect that would be a big part of the process. My takeaway from that June 2015 meeting and since is that where there is a little tension, right, is where there is a person or some persons who would say, we have the authority to do this, and therefore we're going to put an obstacle in front of you that you're then going to have to somehow try to defeat. Right? Don't want to get there, right?
You don't.
And so it sounds like the junction of the city school district developer could do a lot to alleviate that.
It's a you use the word collaborative, right? It's a very collaborative process.
Right.
You're explaining the process, the goal, the end user. The more the entities are behind the notion of what's going to occur on the property, the better. The problem with all of that is you're trying to lay the groundwork for that spirit of cooperation before you know what the end result is. We don't know yet what's going to be here. We don't know if it's a hotel or if it's residential with mixed use. We don't know. Okay, so the notion is to say, look, we're looking at that. Everybody's got a stake in that. We're having that conversation. It's going to be driven by financial factors, but also you've all, I think, made clear that you're part of the community. You've been here a long while, and you haven't jumped to lease or sell this property years ago. You've taken your time. So I think you've hopefully earned, some credibility and when you get to say to the city, look, we have rights too.
Well,
We're not going
and to be clear, for anyone watching, no one has decided to sell or lease the property at
Correct.
this point.
Very, very
Let's just
early
be
stages.
very clear about that.
And I heard that today when I first started.
Good.
Very right to say this is extremely early, and these two proposals could ultimately not even be on the table when you get that far. I just saw these two, and it could be 2 different, or 5 different, or 7, 2 of which are these. It could be any number of things. You could choose to not lease. You could later choose to sell. You could later choose to exchange. I mean, you can do all sorts of things. And yeah, you're open to that. But the good news is, I think you're honing in on what might work. If this sounds good, it sounds right. This is the timeline. This is the process, etc. You start to wrangle with, would you be fronting the money, or would you go the typical route, have the developer get in under an option contract? They go through the process with the city. You, of course, are at the table when it comes to things like historic, but so are they. Not just you, not just them. Because then you've got a developer saying, I want this, I want that, and vice versa, where you both should be at the table. Just development options, again, very, broad brush strokes. Income producing ground lease rather than, a typical lease where you don't have development, it's just, this is my property, don't touch it. Here would be ground lease where development is something different. Entitlements, we've talked about that. You can do a portion or all, we talked about that. Okay. Thank you.
Before you change slides,
Sure.
I wanted to ask about this reasonable cost housing. Right?
Yes.
One of the things I've heard from a number of people is a concern about quote-unquote affordable housing is that it stays that way until it flips. And then it sells at market value, and you've kind of lost that. You've lost that. And I don't know to what extent we could mandate something in terms of residential property that would maintain it at a certain price level, and then along with that, in terms of restrictions we would put on the property, the other thing that's come up is water and water mitigation strategies, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So I don't necessarily need to go into full detail about either one, but to what extent could we?
You're allowed to contractually deal with that. Now, anything that you do to put the onus or burden financially on the developer ultimately comes out of the deal in the sense that you get less rent. But yeah, if it's important to you to say we're going to make sure this affordable stays affordable even beyond the designated stated amount of time, you can do that by way of contract. You just are limiting the opportunity in the future to go from affordable to fair market value. Okay,
Well,
so you can do that. But then the thrust of that though is you can put all the bells and whistles into the lease agreement to say this is a self-contained lease. Okay, say the whole property is being leased out. It's going to be developed for this and that and the other structure. All the utilities are coming out of the developer's project. It's all covered. You might even get costs to move and relocate, but then all that will be factored in by the developer and saying what amount of the ground rent, the lease revenue can come to you. Okay? So you'll know that in the deal, that's the offer. You're gonna have say we go through a request for proposal, yeah. You'll have 3 or 4 pages of terms, and it's gonna say, here's the base rent. It assumes a certain amount of density, a certain amount of units that we're gonna get through the city for multifamily. So it's going to go on to talk about all costs are included, all the entitlements included, CEQA's included, all utilities are included, and then it gets into some nitty-gritty when we actually do the document, where we even put aside funds later to make sure there's maintenance going on, so that we do an audit in year 50. If it needs to be maintained, it needs to be maintained to a certain caliber. Say it's a 75-year lease, you want to make sure you get the property back 75 years out. It's not in disarray. You need to make sure it's in good order. So it deals with, I mean, you should see the document. We're not going to shortchange you when it comes to the ground lease document. So it'll cover, a lot of time to talk about that as well. Okay. All right. So, home stretch. Long-winded, I apologize. Possible timelines here. Starting point would be essentially now. If you were ready to proceed and you liked what you heard and figured you had the wherewithal to move forward on a process and timeline like this, we can go forward with a board resolution. No need for a committee at this point. The resolution could be back to you in the next month easily. Depending on what we are leasing, the whole portion or otherwise, I would determine what notices we send to public agencies. And those agency notices would go out. They get them. They have 60 days to let you know whether or not they're interested in the property. If they are, you sit down for another 90 days. So it's hard to tell you how long that'll take. Very rarely these days on a lease arrangement do you get interest. So 60 days goes by, you're done, you're home free, you can go to auction. If they are interested, we negotiate and talk about what that's going to look like. But long story short, I think you'd be looking at closer to 60, not 150 days for that. Thank you. Then we send out the bid package. This is for the auction. The bid package would have ground lease terms and information regarding the property itself. We would then conduct an auction and hopefully accept an offer. Because of what I told you about this being a ground lease, it may very well be that we do another auction or we go right to a waiver. The waiver I explained already, and I told you that the state Board of Ed has kind of superimposed their own ideas of what it needs to look like, 30 to 60 days, et cetera. The other thing they say is that you have to have a failed bid at auction to get a waiver. And I'm here to tell you that's not in the law. And we have 2 clients that did it the hard way and said, no, we're not going to do a failed bid. We're not going to waste our time. We want the waiver, and we were able to get that waiver. But it took a little extra time and effort. To me, I like the idea of just doing an auction, see what information you get from it, but run the path as a safety net to get the waiver in place. And then you can say, by the way, waiver office, we applied 3 months ago, 4 months ago, 5 months ago. In such and such month, we just did an auction. We didn't like what we got. We want you to finalize our waiver. Then you're at the ready. You haven't lost any time. And we're talking about board resolution and a hearing. It's not a lot of legal work. We just need to get applied to the state. So the goal that I stated here in my mind, or my recommendation, would be to look at things like that waiver concurrently and start thinking about the California Environmental Quality Act early on. If there's something we need to be thinking about, historic and CEQA and whatnot, we can have that conversation now. But the goal would be to push that to a developer through a bid auction. We just don't want to get to auction only to have developers come forward and say, this is what it's going to be. There will be zero affordable, no historic issue. Forget about historic. When you know, well, wait a minute, there's a lot of dialogue about this. You want to start a process and go through this. So I always say that those things can slow us down, but I want to give you a general sense that, all in, you could be looking at anywhere from 6 months, not even 4 or 5 months, to potentially 9 months to get to auction or through RFP with a developer. If we go the waiver route, it could be 9 months, but then at least you've got a deal, you've got an option agreement that gives them the right to look and entitle and do what they need to do. And if they get through that entitlement, you have a ground lease that talks about the terms, all of the terms. Okay. The downside with this, and I didn't put this up there, the only other downside, if you will, not downside, but the big thing to be thinking about is that gets you to the deal. The deal, once you ink that deal 9 months down the road or so, the developer has a year, 14 months, 15 months or whatever to get through the entitlement process, to actually then start the ground lease structure. And under that ground lease, what you start with, construction and or renovation. So depending on what they're going to develop and build, you got to get through that. And so you're not looking at full rent coming in for quite some time. 9 months from now to get to that point of having a deal, 15 months, maybe 16 months, who knows, to get to where the developer goes from option to full-blown ground lease, and then a construction period of time. It's a long time. A ground lease document can talk about what monies might come to you during construction, what comes due by way of deposit, things like that. But the big money will be coming later once it's up and running, because that's when rents are coming in. But lots to that, and we can talk about a lot of that in closed sessions. Gets me to this closed session, real quick. I already touched on it. Just wanted to show you the slide. I always want to remind school boards that it's your right to be meeting in closed session to talk about price in terms of payment. And I say that because I know you default to wanting to share, which is good, and to talk with the community about where you're headed, which is good. But it could undercut what we're ultimately trying to do to set up a bid package or get certain terms. And if we go through the process of waiver, where now instead of an auction, we actually get to sit down and negotiate, saying too much in the next 9 months could tie our hands 9 months from now, where we're saying, look, this is why we need what we need. Here's what we want for maintenance. Here's what we want for relocation, whatever. Okay. So I remind you, when in doubt, we can talk.
Can I clarify something though? I assume you're talking about deal points as opposed to the broader community issues, which I fully expect we're going to be talking a lot with the community about. You're not suggesting that those conversations would undermine negotiations, are you?
100% right. You've got it right. These three here talk about the considerations, the money that's going to come to us, how it's going to be paid to us, who's making that payment and when and whatnot, and basically what issues are going to drive price. If you're talking about historic, if you're talking about lot size and things like that, a lot of that can be in closed session. You've got to trust that I'm going to make sure that we're in closed session correctly for price and terms of payment. But yeah, we would never be 9 months going dark, not letting the community hear about where our head's at with this deal. Because yeah, like you said, things that are not priced in terms of payment become an open session item only.
But in terms of, obviously, we have between now and 9 months from now, we have quite a few budget meetings, right? We have our interim reports. That's where you wouldn't want to say, boy, you know, $50,000 would be really helpful.
It'd be nice to have something on here. You can bring it up and open. I'm not trying to tie anybody's hands. I'm just trying to remind you that you have the right, for a good reason, to do property deals in closed session. That's the only reason for it. Sometimes, like I said, you kind of default to transparency, which is great. It's just not in the property deal, and I think the developers would want that. They want to make sure that they can caucus and come to terms, and that it's realistic, and it's not the cart before the horse. The politics guide the decision, but the politics shouldn't change. And when I say politics, it's all things, community, you know, all of it. It shouldn't change the decision but prematurely. It might ultimately affect it, but you don't want it to happen right out in front of everything, where now this dialogue has to do with the environmental conditions. It's like, we're not even close to being there yet. We're going to have plenty of time for that. Public review periods, planning commission, city council meetings, and a developer process to follow. Community's going to have ample time to consider and know what this project's going to look like. Scores and scores and scores of minutes can be spent on all of that. Public hearings, written comments to CEQA documents, the whole 9 yards. So it's not for you to fix all of that, is what I'm trying to say. So we can talk in closed time to time. That would be it for me. Questions and answers. You've asked a lot of great questions, but I'm available to. Yeah.
So, how much does all of this cost the school district on an average?
Very good. I can sit down and give you an exact total from various districts.
Mm-hmm.
The difficulty is not knowing, is it going to work at bid? Is it going to be a sit-down negotiation?
Ballpark.
After?
Just
right. So we're typically around 6 figures, around $100,000 mark, all in, through a negotiated deal. That's the ground lease document from beginning to end. That's board meetings, that's the whole 9 yards. I've had some that are literally half of that. I had one that went to about 130 all in. The difference between that is really where you go. If there's a historic discussion or simply challenge, if we're saying we challenge a finding of historic, now you're talking some time. If we have a ground lease with the developer, either of these two gentlemen and their entities or anybody else out there, and they like the ground lease, and we go through 2 cuts of that ground lease with red line changes to one side and then back to the other side, and in 3 weeks' time we have a deal, big deal. We have some where it's 4 months back and forth on those terms. Yeah. And we do everything we can, including calling meetings to say, let's get through this. We're offering up some real options here. So those are the things that you can't, we're on the hour, on the clock in that sense.
Andre, just a couple of things. To give you some soft landing here, okay, sure. on the cost.
Yeah.
A lot of times when I deal with a consultant or some kind of organization, for-profit organization, or Andy does, there's recognition how that we have a $25 million budget and one of your other clients has a $225 million budget. In this case, though, we're talking about services or services, right? So there's really no way of saying, we recognize that 100,000 to you is a whole lot more than 100,000 to that $225 million school district. I don't think, though, that's realistic in this case, is it?
It's right. That's correct. It's not, but you do have the benefit of a firm that you would work with for years that works in school district world.
No, you don't.
No. I'm saying the good news. This is the good news. And
Okay.
that's why I like to
You've
talk
done
about
it before. You don't have to recreate it.
So what it is I can't tell you which one this is most similar to, right?
Right.
But months from now I can.
Right.
And if I can say, wow, this is very similar to that ground lease,
Yeah.
the starting point of that ground lease just saved you literally 50 hours worth of work. Because it's starting from a ground lease, that makes a lot of sense. And there should be 3 changes,
that's
not
fair point.
the host.
That's fair point.
And that's the goal. The
Okay,
goal is
so
to
that
be
was-
that trusted
that-
advisor for 50 years.
That was one. Next one, actually on the top of slide 18, and you talked about the resolution convening the advisory committee. Whether we go back to the 2012 version or the 2016 version, I think you said it was okay to use either one. Is that what you said?
Yeah, I think,
Okay.
well,
Because they both recommended moving forward.
correct.
Okay,
And
so
all
that's
you're
one.
getting is the current one to say waiver's fine.
Okay. Well, that's what I was going to ask you about. Okay, so what is when you say board direction to adopt resolution? So now here we leave tonight and we come back, at the November meeting or whatever, have a follow-up to tonight. What would the resolution look like? I mean, how do you, what is it? Is it a 2-sentence job? Is it several page job?
It's 3 pages.
Okay,
2.5
but
pages.
what's the end point?
We are accepting the advisory committee's report from long ago. We're connecting the dots from it. This tells the story of they met, they made a recommendation. Recently, a different committee also supported the notion of moving forward, so we've accepted that. Next step, we're now declaring this surplus. Assuming it is developed, we're not going to need it because we'll be relocated. Next step, we give you the green light to send out agency notices as appropriate, and then next step, and conduct an auction. Okay? Or
So that's all in the resolution?
all in one resolution, all one-stop shop. So now we set it aside, now we're done, we've got what we need legally, send out notices and start that process. If we decide during that time, you know what, we are going to do a concurrent path of the waiver, we'll come back to you with a separate resolution, and again, easy, cheap, we've done it. Separate resolution to say we're doing a waiver. You do a hearing, public hearing, you tell the world we're going to ask the State Board of Ed for a waiver, open and close that hearing, and then we do the application online. That would be another
So does the resolution, I think the answer is no, but let me ask you, does the resolution specify lease or sale, all or part of the property? How specific are you within the resolution?
Yeah, it specifies that we're going to do a ground lease, or we're going to do a lease. The only district that I ever looked to do a resolution that's a lease and or sale was Ojai 4 years ago. Because we were talking about doing both, and so we looked at that. And legally speaking, which was news, I thought you had to pick. Looked at it, you can do both. So the notion is you go out to auction saying, we might sell, we might lease, and then receive all those and reject all the leases or all the sale and pick one, okay? Reject one side of it. Say you like the sale price. You say, forget it, we're not gonna do the lease, we're gonna go with the sale. You can do that. It's a little bit unwieldy. You've heard a lot tonight, so to do now sale and lease, I think is a lot
Well, the board,
faster.
in that first meeting, March 2015, this board unanimously took the position to not sell.
Correct.
Okay, so now we're in a lease.
Lease.
So if you're in a lease, in that resolution, would you specify then at the top end, 7.54 acres, would you put it all out there, even though you may not do that, to give yourself the ability to do all of it?
Yes, we would, what I know of this would be, and I'm assuming we're going to excluding the skate park, so it would be the 7.54, if that's where you're at, it would be all or a portion of yada, yada, yada.
Okay.
So we send out notices to the world saying, hey, we're going to look to potentially lease all of this 7.54.
So the board's, without getting into the legal piece, the board's professional decision has to be whether or not to move forward with a lease for all or part of the property at some point in time.
At some point, assuming they get deals offered to them that makes sense.
Okay.
It very well could be that you just say, I'm rejecting all of this, either at auction or through the process with that request for proposal. You might ultimately receive and just say, not enough cash, doesn't offset us moving and relocating and programs, and there could be something we're not thinking about that later on you just don't want to do it. The notion is.
Okay,
Man.
that's okay.
Oh, my gosh.
They're old, chairs are old.
I'm fine.
Okay, good.
A lot of these chairs are like this anyway. Now it's just more comfortable. So the declaration of surplus property is what I kind of got hung up on here. So if you're saying, well, I have two questions on it. One, you're declaring all or a portion of it surplus,
Correct.
which
It
doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense.
It doesn't make sense, but it's
Right.
in future time. So it's
Okay.
surplus property, assuming that you're ultimately going to do a ground lease. In
Okay.
a sales scenario, you're saying, we don't need this property.
Right.
It's easy. In a lease, it's, I don't think we need this property, and it's available to do a ground lease because we're going to be, under the terms of that ground lease, relocated elsewhere. You currently need it, but you're designating surplus for the future need.
Okay,
Future use.
and then if you decide, well, if we don't like any of the deals,
Yes.
then do we retract that at some point? Or is it just left open?
Great question. Some school districts have left it open and kind of want to revisit from time to time. I like to just put a bow around it and be final. So the legal reason to do something about it and undo it, if you will, is things like the Naylor Act. The Naylor Act, for example, will look, remember I mentioned to you the city, county, and park and rec, if you had Naylor Act property, can buy 30% of your property. It's 30% of your surplus property. So let's say you had 3 surplus properties, 10 acre each. They get 30% of that 30 acres.
Wow.
If they're all up. So I don't like school districts having surplus property laying around. If you're not doing something with it, take it off the block by saying it's no longer surplus. We'll take further action in the future. We can undo anything we do.
How do we advertise? Where do you advertise that this sort of thing is up for bid?
So you have the two choices. You can either do a broker or not.
Okay.
With sales, we've had a lot of good results where we send out, we have an ongoing list, if you will, of people that receive our bid packages, people that are interested. If it's an infill development, that is an elementary school where you're going to build homes and put it there, we know the residential builders who are going to want to bid on that. We've seen them over the last 15 years bid on properties and like. So we can send it out to those. They then shop it around and talk with partners, and it really gets out there quite a bit. We also send that to all local brokerage houses, all local brokers. So we can do is we can blanket Ventura County, for that matter, and just get it to tons and tons, and we send that out in a mailer. The next step would be, do you want to have it listed online through a multiple listing service?
Okay.
Commercial space available, yada, yada, yada. That's where you would have the benefit of an appraiser, a broker coming in to list that property for you. If you're just going to have a broker list it, and if you show it a couple times, that's where we say to that broker, have a flat fee, we'll pay you for your services, but we're not asking you to get a national company to come in and do X, Y, and Z. So there's a lot to talk about. There are options. The lease is harder than sale. On a sale, I'd say we got it covered. With the lease, a broker may be a value. I just don't want you to pay too much for it.
Okay. All right.
How much, are you fairly familiar with the 7-Eleven process?
Yeah,
So-
fairly. I mean, I do them all the time, but yours,
So
I
to
did read
be,
it.
to be clear
Yes.
about one aspect of it, our most recent 7-Eleven did not, was not in charge or charged with looking at this property.
Right.
They summarily suggested that we look at this property as potentially surplus, but it was not, they were not provided any, to my knowledge, Hank, they were
No.
not provided information about it.
No,
But
no,
it
no.
is one of their points in business.
Instead,
Yeah, sure.
well, but they didn't analyze it,
Right.
right?
No, they did not.
The prior 7-Eleven
Right.
committee did that, and so it seems like that would suggest that it would not be appropriate to use the current 7-Eleven as the means by which we would deem this surplus. And then the follow-on question is that Andy recently did an analysis of exactly how we would respond if we had to get off this property, and that analysis is still ongoing. You sort of suggested it would be in the lease, sort of, but how is it in the lease? The lease just says get the hell off the property.
Yeah, the lease is, those terms will be, negotiated sometime from now, so you might have a lot more information between now and then. But what I meant by that would be, you would be able to say, you're gonna be off the property, whether or not dollars will come to you from a developer to get off the property or
Got it.
not. But it could very well just say, on such and such date, they're gonna start construction, we need to be off by then. That's it. Within 30 days of them having project approvals through the city, we will be 100% vacated. It could be that simple or a lot more convoluted. With regard to the advisory committee, I agree. The better of the two committees to look at it would be the first, But when I say that, the requirement for this is just the waiver issue, checking the box, is to have an advisory committee do it. There's, I think, a recognition, certainly the state has understood. We have somewhere it's gone way back. Somewhere there's like 17 years ago, the advisory committee did this, that, and the other. We reconvene and walk them through their paces to look at the property to see nothing's changed. Here, I don't think we made the determination you don't need to reconvene the committee only because of the most recent one. We did it because there aren't really differences in facts between that and the first report, and you had a robust report. Your report, frankly, is better than a lot of reports. Some school districts hire us and we work in the committee process, and I like to think that we do a good job and they're robust and there's a lot to it. Other school districts go it alone and don't do enough, and then you did it mostly alone and did it right. You did plenty and then some, and I mean, hats off to two at the table. I mean, you guys really did a lot of work. And even more recently, there was recognition and a review of that, and I saw that online even. So it's certainly out there, it's transparent, and there's no time limit to it. But I would be the first to say, you know what, God, everything's changed, the market's crashed, this, that, and the other. If those were the facts, I'd say, forget the time limit issue, it just is sort of stale. Here, it's not stale. I think you're more than fine. So, convene the first one if they exist. I think that would be smart.
Okay. Wow.
We have you on tape. We can just go back and review it all.
Ted, did you have a
Written
question
questions,
for
submit 'em.
Andreas?
Boom.
Okay, Ted has a question.
There's one thing I think they would like to hear clarification. You maybe touched on it previously, is that, and I assume it's going to be an unsubordinated ground lease.
Correct.
I'm sure they may not know the difference between them, and they're going to need to do that.
Sure.
And then just kind of sometimes, you know, the counsel for your lender, I call it lender, my lender, let's say, will want certain changes that are, you know, usually not substantive. You know, anyway.
Great question.
As far as stepping into, you know, cases of default. So.
Good
I'm
question.
sure those questions weren't heard on our mics for
Yeah, so we
recording.
just
I'll
read
if you-
mine.
that. Two very solid questions. The first one being, will this be an unsubordinated or subordinated ground lease? Our answer would be, it would be unsubordinated. You don't want your ground lease to get out of position in terms of priority. That is, you don't want the lender, the financing arm here, the lender, to be able to foreclose on your ground
Yeah.
if there's a default.
Okay.
So you want to
That's
be protected
important.
from that.
Yeah.
Again, the ground lease is like that, and it goes through all sorts of issues. What occurs if there's a default, who steps in, what the lender's rights are. The second question went to that, which is the lender's going to want to see, any financing entity for any developer is going to want to see the document and be okay with the document. So what we put out there, we wouldn't start with the scorched earth, this is perfect for the district, horrible for a developer and a financing entity, because you'll never get that deal done. And it's going to charge legal fees to go back and forth 100 times. You want to start with, based on a project like this would be a reasonable set of facts, reasonable set of criteria upon which to decide and negotiate, and frame it up as we can decide on maintenance issues and rent issues and all these things, but we're not going to sit there and go back and forth all day long on what lenders' rights are and what they look like. You know, the structure of the lease from the financial arm of the entity. We're going to daylight that so that during that process they can show their financial entity, this is what I want. We would always ask, and always have, when a developer comes to the table and we're negotiating anything back and forth, that those issues from the financial arm have come, that the lender has put in their 2 cents. Sometimes they'll say, not until we know you've got a deal, go work it through the city for a year, and then we, the lender, will chime in, and we say no. We understand there could be tweaks later where a lender might need to tweak a little something, but they're not wholesale changes. And if a developer is spending money for a year, or it's 18 months, to go through an entitlement package, to go through California Environmental Quality Act, all that comes with it, spending money, they've got skin in the game. And they need to be really sure that they've got a deal. And if they ask for changes down the road, you can say no. You've wasted a lot of time if you say no, but you can say no and say, hey, we thought this would go. Those changes are unacceptable. We won't accept an amendment to the deal. And so it behooves the developers to make sure that they've got language that ultimately their financial arm will appreciate and be okay with. So we do as much as we can on the front end to limit the guesswork on the back end.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I got a question. Can you just speak a little bit anecdotally about the kind of scenarios where districts have done what sounds sort of crazy, where they've on spec gone through the entitlement process? Because I assume rational people made that decision. So
yeah, the most current was the one I spoke to. That district thought it would be, thought they knew what the city wanted, spent about $350,000 to go through California Environmental Quality Act, whole 9 yards, did a zone change, okay, so general plan amendment and zone change, and ultimately came up with 2 options. One would be multifamily, bunch of units. The other would be more of a townhome approach and mixed use. Either or, both got through. And the development community, 18 months after all that was done and started and gotten through, the development community said, I don't like either of those. We like a multifamily with different density and different setbacks and different everything. And took a lot of time to get back to an auction where everybody in the room was on the same page of what should have been built, and it wasn't what the district's consultants had said to them.
But what I'm getting at is, were you counsel to them?
No, we weren't counsel until we came in to clean it up.
Got it.
Yeah.
So what's your, I mean, because based on what you've presented to us, I can't even imagine us thinking that that would be a good idea. So I'm just trying to wonder what other options there are. You clearly don't think that's a good option, but somebody did think it was a good option.
I think it's a good option if you're in a district where you truly believe and know and have certainty that it's going to be blank. If this screamed out, this has to be multifamily residential, you're never going to get more than 30 units back there, period, and this frontage you're going to keep to yourself and it's just those units, that's it, you could probably be able to get a consultant on a reasonable price to get through that whole package, and you'll find somebody to build those 30 units. But I can't tell you, did you leave more on the table? Could you have more units? What is the offset? How much could you have gotten if you had the frontage, et cetera, et cetera? But there'll be some consultants that will stand up here and say, yeah, let me walk you through it. I'll get you entitled. I'll get you entitled.
If a district does that, how does that impact that whole, sort of highest best use aspect of what you've just told us about? I mean, it would seem like the district has already, made decisions that may not get the highest value for the property. How can that be justified?
I think it can be justified. I think it's harder. Again, I have my bent, and you picked up on it clearly. I have a district right now who's got a property that's difficult. Okay, it's difficult. Nice elementary school until they realized there's a fault line right going down. They went to modernize the elementary school and realized, wow, this is quite a fault line. They dug the Grand Canyon. It's still visible. You can see this, crevasse, this huge, runs the length of the thing. And the state said, we're not going to give you money to modernize. And they said, well, we're not going to modernize anyway because we've got this problem. Now, you can still sell that property, and certain entities are still willing to build on a property like that, but it's not going to be for school use. But we haven't been able to successfully pull that one off. We've gone to market twice in an auction, and we're thinking about the next steps. Do we want to do the waiver? Do we want to go out there? And this district is actually looking at doing it on their own, working with the city, getting an entitlement package through to say this is going to be office space, city with a little mixed use in the front, et cetera, et cetera. They think they've got their pulse on something that would ultimately be easier to then say to developers who have lost sight of the vision. If you've got developers here that have vision for this site, let them spend the money, don't entitle it. If you have a property, however, that you just can't drum up enough market interest, and you think by giving them the give, which is this is what you can build, we went and got it for you, we paid for it, now you might very well have people at auction. But you are making a bunch of assumptions, and hopefully you get it right. So yeah, here, because you've got people that, it's a heck of a property, and just where you are, the location of it, I think it's much easier to go the developer route and let them put, and then just maximize the amount you can get on your ground lease. We've done that again most recently. That district I told you about with the rent amount, and they're gonna nibble on the deal, and we're gonna have to deal with that if the developer doesn't get full 25 units per acre. But other than that, we told them, I don't want to hear about all these other costs. These are costs of doing business. If you want an amendment, you want to nibble on the deal, you got to show us you couldn't get ultimately through what you said you can get through, and that's it.
All right. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Great job.
That was amazing.
Yeah,
truly,
thank you.
truly amazing.
Appreciate it.
Whew. So now we want to take a 10-minute break to clear our minds. So it's 7:30 now, so at 20 minutes to 8 we'll reconvene. We do have refreshments in the boardroom down the hall, so or the conference room rather, so you're more than welcome to join us down there. So please stand up,
Shake Ryan.
Shake that, right. I want to show everyone online we have beautiful calendars, school lunch calendars from Food for Thought. These are beautiful. The OUSD Nutrition Services
That's
and
the
Food for Thought.
second annual.
Second annual.
Second
They're
annual.
gorgeous. All right. Good job, folks. Okay. All right. So now moving on to 7.1 personnel. I'd like to take 7.1 and 7.1.2 together because they both basically are the same. Speaker. Pardon? Speaker. Oh, speaker. Thank you. Do have a speaker. We'll do that in a minute. We have a speaker who, Jim Richmond. It's your turn.
Can I just speak?
Go right there, please.
Because of the video.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Okay.
And the mic is there so everyone can hear you.
Okay, my name is Jim Richmond. I am a resident here in Ojai. I live at 703 Country Club Drive. I'm also a real estate lawyer. I'm the head of the real estate group at Stradling, Yoka, Carlson, and Routh. And I'm also the vice president of the board of the Ojai Valley Museum. So I have a lot of interest in this project for a lot of different reasons. I don't represent anybody that's looking to do a project. I know some of the players. But I did want to come and tell you that I thought the real estate lawyer who gave you the presentation did an excellent job. I think he was spot on all of his points. And let me just quickly go through those points with you without repeating a very extensive and informative presentation. But first of all, the concept of doing RFPs and the waiver process, spot on. You want to do that in order to further rationalize what is the highest and best use for this project. If you put it up to auction, you're going to discourage people to spend time on a real proposal that will get you further along to what you want to do here. For example, you have a very big site here, which ought to be for the highest and best use primarily from a value standpoint, a commercial, retail, hotel orientation, it seems to me. You also have a big site here. So a developer may come along and offer you a master developer situation where the master developer would primarily be the commercial, hotel, retail developer, but he may want to take the back parts of the property and sub it out to a very responsible multifamily developer. So you have that possibility being fleshed out in your request for proposals or your RFP, your responses. So on the entitlement issue, on a project this complex, you certainly don't want to do the entitlements yourself. You're hiring a developer who understands how to do entitlements and how to deal with all the community stakeholders. That's who you're really engaging. Somebody who can get the job done, who has experience, who has the ability to work with you and with the community to get the job done at the highest and best use to you. Now your lease is really a joint venture agreement. You're going to agree on how the two are going to progress in this huge development. And so it is a lease, landlord-tenant, but it really is a joint venture agreement. And so you'll be able to say in that lease the guidelines that you want to impose. So I think that means I have to quit. Let me quickly say on the broker side, you want a fee if the broker's primary job is to give you a notion of fair market rent. You want a commission if his job is to go out and find people. I think the latter scope of work is not really what you need. You're going to get plenty of interest in this project. That's really all I wanted to say. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jim.
Thanks.
How much are we going to get charged for that?
0. I want to see a great project here. It's going to be great for Ojai.
Okay, so now back to 7.1.1 and 7.1.2.
I'll have a motion to approve them.
I would second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
None opposed. 7.1.3, this is a resolution requesting district support and participation in the California School Employee Teacher Credentialing Program Consortium. And this, do I have a motion to approve this?
I'll move to approve.
I'll second and say I love this.
Isn't it a great idea?
Yes,
Yeah, it
this is great.
Truly.
It's really great, because this is just what we need.
Homegrown.
Yep. All in favor?
Aye.
None opposed. Okay, now moving on to service contracts between the, this is 7.3.1, service contracts between the Ventura County Community College District and OUSD. And this is for the Career Technical Education Programs and the Career Pathways Trust Grant. So that we've got some great things happening there. Do we have any, do I have a motion to approve that?
I'll move to approve.
Second.
Any discussion?
Yeah, I just have one question I forgot to ask you. On the second page, it says, identify and report sources of the required match for the project budget. So is this, or do we split the cost of these things? Or I thought they were paying for all of it.
No, so there are portions that we pay for instance, some of the staff. We have 3 positions at Nordhoff that are funded by VCOE, but the other ones, for instance, Fender Carnine's, both his welding as well as his auto shop classes, we're paying his salary. He's been a staff member of ours for over a decade. We've been paying for it, but then they come in with supplementary dollars to fund equipment or structural improvements for the program. So we do make a contribution. It's the staffing that we've had in the past that we've just maintained the staffing costs. That's where our contributions come.
Any other questions?
Just out of curiosity, I've heard talk of this at the VCOE and the Tiffany Morse and all that other stuff, but I'm just wondering, what's been the response here in this district to this program?
Well, I have to say the overall, from Chaparral to Nordhoff, the relationship among Tiffany, Kim, our teachers, Andy, I think it's extraordinary. I mean, the impact that just in general career pathways has had on this very small district. If you were to extrapolate, to a district of 4, 5, 10 times our size, they would have tens of people working out there. I mean, we have, how many different courses do we have now and people involved with all elements of this? It's just tremendous.
Oh, I don't know. We have 7 pathways, and each pathway has potentially multiple courses.
Oh no,
Tiffany is incredible and has been a great resource to everyone in the county, but for some reason it does seem like she has a special liking
for. She likes Kim.
She and Kim have a terrific relationship. But
yeah.
There's no question Ojai has been a huge beneficiary of both of these grants, and to a disproportionate amount relative to our size compared to other districts.
That's why I said what I said. I think it would be amazing.
Right.
Yeah. Somebody among you was very flexible too, because some of them are being offered in the evenings because there's not room.
Well, we just say yes.
It's wonderful.
It's easy. Yeah.
Basically, it's an extra
people are doing
you
that.
can take because you're fitting it in.
You really need to. Nordhoff's great in that relationship between Tiffany and Kim is special, but all the stuff that Becky has done is
Becky's amazing.
Is really over and above. In fact, every time when we get a new proposal, and she wants to make it available to the students here, she said, "Well, in order to do that, I may have to teach at night. She may have to teach science at night, or something like that." And so she's all in. That's her background anyway. She ran the garden over at Nordhoff, and she's all in on horticulture, etc. And in fact, I had a meeting. This is related, but very short. Becky and I had a meeting with actually the executive director of a Western States certification group for alternative high schools, and it was quite a good meeting. I thought he was very helpful in thinking about Chaparral of the future. And when he saw what our kids had, his reaction was, there's no way that you could duplicate this per student in a high school. and the opportunities that our kids have there above the curriculum. I would call them co-curricular, not extracurricular like sports, but co-curricular per student are way more than you would ever see in a high school of 700 or 2,700. So it's really pretty remarkable what's happening over there. You saw that. You were you were involved.
I was in the shared room. Yeah. That was amazing.
So I think this is, Mike, I think this is, I know you're involved in your own environment here, right? So you have it right there. But I would just say any report you would ever make expressing our appreciation would be really right on point.
So all in favor?
I don't think did we have anyone?
I thought we just didn't
Have
miss it.
a
I'm sorry.
motion? Mm-hmm.
We did,
We have
we did.
a motion.
I think we did.
Yeah. All in favor?
Aye.
And none opposed, all right. Okay, now we're gonna do our first reading of governing board policies. This is an action item.
That's it for now.
Oh.
Is it action?
It's not an action
No, it should be
item. I'm
information.
very
Oh, I'm
sorry.
sorry, not an
Is that
action
wrong?
item, it's
Okay.
a.
Very
This is the first one.
Yeah,
Yeah, it should be information, that's right.
Information only.
Thanks.
Okay, so it's fairly short this time, only 90 pages. So.
Anybody have any questions on the first 89?
Does anybody have anything that they need questions answered?
Yep, on page 8.
On page 8?
Number 21. Oh, never mind. Andy answered that one for me.
Okay.
Never mind.
Kevin, did you have anything?
No. My first is on page 22.
22, okay.
And I didn't get Andy's response until I checked
I
during the
apologize.
meeting.
Okay. You got it.
But the first paragraph there, the 15,000 doesn't really apply to us, right?
Correct. So I agree that the way our policies are proposed by CSBA is a bit confusing on this matter. So if you look at page 22, the paragraph advertise competitive bids, there's a $15,000 limit for anything in excess you're required to advertise. That's for districts that have not gone through the CUPCA process. Remember we talked about CUPCA a meeting or two ago, and I struggled through the acronym. I actually have it now. It's a few pages later. We'll discuss it. So if we at any point are no longer compliant with CUPCA requirements, then we'll default back to this, and that's why CSBA and John Walker have recommend that we maintain this portion of the policy. Mm-hmm. However, so long as we maintain our CUPCA guidelines, we're actually governed by page N, which is actually page 35 of 90. And that's where you can see on the bottom third of the page, the thresholds $45,000, $175,000, and in excess of $175,000. So we are not required, nor do we go out and advertise for any project over $15,000, but rather, if it's unique where we need to, we do it at a lower threshold. But for instance, the Measure J projects this summer, we went from our qualified list of contractors, and we brought out at all times at least 3 contractors and did an informal bid process with them rather than a more formal process that if it was in excess of 175 that we'd have to do.
I would just feel more comfortable if we added then, unless the project qualifies for the Uniform Public Construction Cost Accounting Act.
You're saying on that page 22 have the inserted?
Right, because this language is pretty solid.
Sure.
Right?
And it's an administrative regulation, so that's important.
Yeah.
Yep, we can.
Okay, we'll do that.
I don't see any reason we couldn't do that.
No, it's not at all, so, yeah.
Well, we're ready for November.
Okay, any other things?
No.
How about you, Michael?
Just one question, and this is on page 58. I probably know the answer, but I just wanted to ask anyway. This is about conflict of interest from board members.
Uh-huh.
And when it talks about will or may be affected family issues, that would not refer to board members with kids in schools, whatever.
What page are you talking
Where
about?
are we now, Ken?
I mean,
Page 58.
Which paragraph?
The language, the first paragraph.
The first paragraph, okay.
It says in a designated.
Oh,
Shall participate.
No, I see your point. I mean, like, pretty much every decision you make.
well, no, I thought, my reading of it was that something very specific.
Yeah.
Like,
I got my kids some good grades.
Well, see,
But it would do that.
Tuition's on the sea.
I thought it was just financial.
You know,
Right,
you're
I
right,
believe it's
actually,
dealing
that's,
with
I think
financial.
it's financial, it's financial.
Financial gain.
It doesn't say that, but that is what it is.
Yeah, I assumed that, I just.
That's a pretty good
Sure.
question.
retribution against teachers.
Yeah,
okay.
they-
Well, that's still allowed, right?
Actually, I have one back on, not a question, but just a note on page 54. Right below the first box, it says the superintendent or designee shall annually submit to California Department of Education for approval of titles of classes. It says new, so I just wanted to make sure that we are gonna be doing that, annually submit the
I think
titles of classes.
we,
We've always done that.
we do that.
Becky takes care of that.
Right, mhm,
Oh,
we
this
do
is the
that.
adult ed classes.
Yeah.
And then, can I just ask the question that I asked you again, because I'm not sure. So we get an allotment for adult education, correct? And
Correct.
and that's regardless of how big or small the program is? Or
Well,
is
it's,
there a,
it is based on, I think it's based on expected enrollment, right? Okay. Again, back to Becky's creativity, she's tied into the Ventura County program, and we're getting well more than 100% more than we would if we were not involved with that program. So I think you
Yeah,
know
so-
the numbers, right?
Well, so we're part of the Ventura County Adult Education Consortium, and just a reminder, that's what we actually brought to you a few months ago on, we made the change to become the fiscal agent for that entity. By doing that, it actually is generating about $60,000 in additional revenue to our general fund because we can charge them an indirect cost, meaning that we charge them for the time of our business office, even though we know it's not going to take our business office, that amount. It's a set indirect fee schedule. So yeah, we're part of this consortium. We, again, Hank's absolutely correct that if you looked at us on a per ADA basis relative to the size of our district, Becky does a terrific job to really maximize the dollars that are coming to us relative to other districts on ADA basis.
I mean, I'm just wondering, I noticed things that could be included here are things like ESL education for adults. I'm
She's starting
wondering
it.
if
Yeah.
there's,
Yeah, it
right, I'm
started-
just wondering if there's
started in
any
spring.
benefit in us advertising that more than we do.
I don't know,
Or recruiting.
She's certainly expanded the advertising. I can't tell you, I know exactly the process or protocols that she's using, but the enrollment is up considerably from what it was. ESL is there.
So we would be
Career education is
compensated
there.
more if we had more
Yeah, I
students.
think so. Do you know the per ADA?
I don't know
I don't know that
personally,
either.
no.
The degree of your program does drive dollars, okay? But the big change is exactly what Andy talked about, the fiscal agents. I mean, $50,000 is a lot of money, you know? And I appreciate the impact on the business office too there, you know. That's
It's
not
just we're
easy.
working so hard sometimes to get younger students.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if there's any benefit to getting older students.
I
Yeah.
think we could increase, because I know I was, in the spring, I was like, ooh, I want to take that class, and then I haven't heard anything about it until just now, and I thought, oh, I
Well,
kind of
we'll look
missed
at
it,
that.
it already
No, we'll look
started,
at
you
it.
know, so.
Yeah,
promote
she'd be
us.
motivated to do that, I know that. That's a good point.
I have questions on 68 and 69. Do we actually need to adopt this resolution at some point? Have we already? Do the
No.
blanks have to be filled in?
That was my question too, because we've already done all the other work listed here, but the resolution is new. So
Yeah,
even
so-
though we've done it, we need to retroactively do the resolution?
So it is new proposed policies, so we're actually waiting until the policies are approved next month to then also
So is
be
that-
implementing
Set the calendar?
the actual resolution.
Yeah, okay.
Andy,
So
can you-
December for the resolution?
I don't see actually why it couldn't be done in conjunction. It
Okay,
could be next
November?
month as well,
Okay,
at the
okay,
same
good.
time that we're approving the overall
Okay.
policies.
Okay, good.
Can you turn on the lights, Andy? I hate to see you sitting in the dark there. Thank you.
He's not in the dark. He's not in the dark.
I know, he's not. All right, the only question I have is, especially the first section deals with charter schools. Do the charter schools get, starting with page one? This whole thing on, well, actually, page one, and then that's the policy sheet, but the whole charter school thing, page 4, where it's, does the charter school get the board policies?
Do they get the policies that we adopt, or are you asking, do they have the
Yeah.
same service through CSBA where
Well,
they're getting policies as well?
Yeah, I mean, do they get these
I-
policies? Will they get them? You know, so they can
I
make sure
actually
they.
don't know the.
We will give
would we
them
send
these-
that over to
any
them?
policy that affects one of our programs, we will provide them once they've
Okay,
been approved.
perfect. That's
As opposed to just a policy dump.
yeah. Okay, great.
Okay,
Thank
good,
you.
okay.
All right.
Yeah, good.
All right. So
Good.
next meeting we'll
Yep,
approve those.
we will, with the one change that they
Yeah.
talked about.
Okay. Superintendent's report.
Well, here we are, you know, like almost 2 months into the year. I guess what I would say to you is I had a very, Andy was at this meeting, had a very interesting conversation. I'm going to start on with the secondary level right now because we've had a lot of elementary school conversation, okay? And had a meeting just within the last week or so. As I said, Andy joined the secondary school administrators, right? So going around the table, right, at the high school now, we have Greg in his continuing role, Dave Monson, new role, right, in academic services, assistant principal, Jim Hall, dean of student services, right? So he's doing pretty much everything that Dave has done for the last number of years, but in a non-administrative role, but it looks a lot like an administrator. Okay, he's not a certificate administrator.
He doesn't have to
Doesn't
wear a
want to
suit.
be.
He doesn't have to wear a suit.
Right, he gets to wear whatever he wants to wear. Exactly, Dave. You can tell the difference. You know, Greg and Dave have this. Jim will never have this.
Jim will never have
unless he
that.
maybe comes here to make a report. I don't know. We'll see. But
I don't think
he's
so.
doing a wonderful job. He's doing a wonderful job. And then, of course, at junior high, we have Javier in a new role and Carol Paquette in a new role, even compared to the one that she had when I came here in 2009. At that point, she was actually a dean, the third administrator, at .8 administrator, .2 teacher, and then rotated out of that, and I had to cut the position for all reasons that we know. And then Becky was there, actually also sort of in a new role, albeit she's called principal, but she was pretty much doing that with yours truly, the technical principal, for the last couple of years. And so what I did was, it wasn't really substantive particularly, but I just went around the table and asked each person to just talk about what the first 6 weeks have been like. I mean, I remember the first 6 weeks of various roles and thinking I wish someone would ask me how I thought it was going. And Andy, I'm going to turn to you in a minute, so I'll give you a little bit of lead time. I was really heartened by something that I know Angie's here and Shelley, you've had so much experience with schools. I was so heartened by a theme that emerged, which was, apart from, you know, the daily challenges and kids being kids and all that, just how much each person really, really enjoyed working with the other or others.
Oh, great.
I mean, it was, right? I mean, that was...
You give me lead time and
That
then you
was-
steal what I was going to say.
That was it.
My biggest
Okay,
question.
I'll stop, you fill in the blank. That was it, right? Okay, you go ahead.
No, I absolutely agree. That was something that perhaps the greatest takeaway and just the feelings I had after that meeting was it almost turned into a competition of
Yeah, who likes to work with
who
each
likes
other?
to work with their you know, colleagues.
I love
the
you, no,
most.
I love you more.
And it was just, yeah, it was great to see that we really do have very, very strong teams right now at the secondary schools. It was great.
Yeah, so we had, Carol and I were reflecting back on, you know, her, I guess at that point it was her third year in the position, and it was my first year here, and we were reflecting a little bit back on the dynamics of the what was then the three-person group and some challenges that existed there. But to me, you know, when teachers see leaders enjoying being leaders and enjoying working with each other, and there's not a competition for like who's responsible for this. No, it's my job. You get out of my office. And I think even it struck me even most at Matilaha, where you know, they in just in a few weeks they had set up their not only their special responsibilities, but when one would cover for the other and how much one trusted each other. And I can tell you that I remember back when I had to have a couple of conversations to convince Javier that I really thought he should be the principal when Bill announced he was leaving. And then Javier came to that point, but he gave me an ultimatum. He said, I'll do it if, and then of course we had our, you know, our posting of the position, but it was clear to me that he would do it if Carol was his assistant. And so right from the beginning, even before they started, they had that kind of relationship. And Greg, in fact, said at the meeting how much he and Dave persuaded Jim to step into the role, because that, you know, it's not, Jim's got so many wonderful attributes, and the kids love him, and families know him for 20 years or so. But, you know, he wouldn't necessarily by his own nature say, I'm going to go out and, you know, be in charge of things, right? And I think the fact that Dave was so good at what he did and set up the infrastructure to come in and be, you know, the disciplinarian, but have Jim's persona laid on top of it, right? And it's different. I mean, Dave was, he needed to be, when he came into that role, he needed to set up very clear expectations for behavior, right? And that's how this whole citizenship thing emerged. And, you know, we used to, he had that moniker of, you know, 00 Monson, right? You know, he'd also always sort of be around the corner, you know? And so when there was some misbehavior, and he got you, you know, he caught him, and the kids laughed about it, but he was, you know, quite adamant about the way students should behave. And I think that became then the forerunner for Jim to be able to come into the position, because it would have been much harder if that basis hadn't been set. And then Greg and Dave had just a great relationship. So Dave moving over from that role, which can, you know, be sort of enervating. I mean, I did it. I can tell you that being a disciplinarian is challenging emotionally and sometimes physically. So he did that, and now he's in the you know, the loftier academic environment, right? So he's learning that, and Greg did it before he did it, right? So, you know, it went from Greg to Kim, right, for a couple of years, and now to Dave. So each person. You know, Greg from Dan Music, and I help Greg a bit on these things, but mostly Greg figures it out. You know, Jim Hall had Dave, and Dave had Greg, right? And Javier was an assistant, and Carol's coming back. It's just I think it's a marvelous confluence of those people, and I've already given you all kinds of accolades. Becky knows what a wonderful job I think she's doing, including conversation tonight, right? So I just think we have that group of 6 that is first rate, and I'm just very, very pleased, proud to be turning them over to Andy, because I've inherited other kinds of groups. I'll just leave it at that. I've inherited groups that weren't quite so convivial with each other and effective with each other. So he's got, and plus throw the elementary people in there, and I just think he has a wonderful group to inherit. So that's what I want to tell you.
Thank you. Wow, that's awesome. Okay, 7.5.3, items for future agendas. This is information. Anybody have any?
Yeah, I would like to go back to some more budget talking and bring in Measure J and discussions about a project manager or your hiring. I mean, I would just like to, you know,
Sure.
you're looking to possibly hire.
Yeah, we're recruiting currently for the bond manager
So
for
I'd
an internal
like to
position.
talk about that and our thoughts on.
See, that's one I think that there's no reason that there's purposeful double negative. There's no reason why we couldn't and shouldn't put that on the next agenda. I mean, we're ready. Well, there are parts of that. One is the specific report on bond manager, may even have someone by then, Measure J. But then I want to get back to the issue that you and Kevin in particular raised back during the elementary school organization thing. So, you know, we are all committed to having public conversation. Angie started the conversation, actually. We're all committed to having a public conversation, or more than one, about the details of the budget, and do it before, well before the 2017-18 budget is constructed, even sort of for the first time, which is January to March, sort of. So what I would hope to do then is to get agreement in this agenda item at the November 15th meeting on what that would look like. You know, we've had some special meetings, obviously, before, but clearly 1 or 2 special meetings, I would think. So I'd like to talk about how you'd like to do it and when you'd like to do it. Okay? So so specific details, and then a calendar assignment.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, you're closer. You're going to use this for an ad, so go ahead.
I didn't think of that. Good idea. What I actually wanted to bring up were 2 things regarding Measure J. One is, as we're talking about the new manager position potentially, if we could also go through again, just for the folks at home, our procedures for working with the Citizens Oversight Committee.
Oh, sure.
And the board and administration in making the decisions about what projects we're going to do and when and how and how much. And the other part of that is there seems to have been a warm reception about trying to get a pool done in the community, and maybe to have a discussion about what kind of if we can form a committee or task somebody, whether that would be a subcommittee of the Citizens Oversight Committee, could be a separate committee to reach out to the city and the Parks and Rec and bring in community members who are interested. Community members have approached me saying they'd be interested in doing something like that. So just a discussion about how best we could move forward on that to maximize the benefit.
Okay.
Yeah, I would add maybe we could, a couple of us, I'd be happy to be involved, to advertise and say, let's have a community meeting to talk about the community pool. I mean, I will tell you, I had my second meeting with Bill Gilbreth on the subject of the gazebo. I think he's talked to you guys about.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Which I think is great. We joked at the beginning of our breakfast that I wasn't able to able to turn him over to the pool. Oh. Okay. But yeah, I get Mark Whitman.
Have you seen Mark Whitman's rendering?
He did a nice,
yes, cool.
And and it's great, but it's a good example of what it's a. He's going to do that through private funds, and I'm sure he'll get it done. And
it was on display at Ojai Day.
Oh, it was.
So I was able to see it.
Yeah, and that's the Rotary Club of Ojai project.
Yeah, but of course, I mean, I'll make no bones about it. I'd love to see similar. It's going to take greater effort, but boy, that community pool would be amazing. I did want to add along the same lines, COC, all that. I hate to add more burden, but I'm sure it's information that's elsewhere. I think a monthly statement about what we spent on Measure J and what we paid our construction management firm. I saw we paid another close to $30,000 this month.
In the Friday letter, you mean something like that? Just a note. Yeah, the Friday letter is a good place to get us information.
And probably it would be great to include the COC on it. I mean, I know they feel underutilized.
Yeah.
Well, there isn't anything. I mean, we sent them all everything involved from this summer.
No, I know. They're just. I'm just saying it's at the very least like here's
okay,
what.
No problem.
Perhaps the answer is very little, but at least
no problem at all. That's
so
all
how
public.
would I mean, because I am. I guess this would come up at that meeting when you discuss this position that you're looking to fulfill. I'm really feeling I would like to break the contract with Alfred Beatty. I just don't see the value of that contract, considering the projects that we're doing, and you could certainly show me how I'm wrong, but I think it'd be something worth discussing.
Well, I'll on those lines, I thought Andreas's ideas about why not or why to hire a broker were sort of along similar lines. I mean, he was saying, make sure you're going to get the value out of it. I'm with Jane. I mean, I'm not of the mind that we necessarily fire them, but boy, it seems like a lot of money we've spent for things that are mostly in the nature of here's what might happen when we go to bid, which in my view will be better found out when we go to bid.
Yeah. I think the best thing to say tonight is Andy, predominantly I secondarily, will work on that report of what services have been rendered, what expertise they have that we don't, which is huge because we have none in this area, and what it would mean if we didn't have them. To Andy, who's already taken on the entire supervision of MOT and nutrition services. Okay, I mean, like, if a person isn't there, either because the person leaves, which we've now had 2 major leaders leave in the last 6 months or so, or you decide to separate yourself from them, what then? Who does the work? Okay, now, a big part of the bond, I mean, the whole point of the bond manager is to supplant a big part of the Balfour Beatty experience going forward, right? Okay, now, going backwards, we could say, yeah, I agree, there has been some significant work done to plan for projects that we haven't done yet. That's fair enough. We think those projects are going to get done, like roofs, okay, for example. So anyway, no problem ever giving a report. We can do that. But I just want you to know that I said at one meeting, one of my main jobs in the last 6 months or so has been to protect Andy from himself and David Rogers from Andy, right? because we've got these two dynamic young leaders who want to do so much so fast all the time that you know, I've seen a few of these examples where, you know, there's only so much anybody can do. And right now, I am concerned. I will tell you, I am concerned that we do not have expertise, specific expertise in the area of what we call maintenance, operation, transportation. We don't have administrative expertise. We have great people. Those three people, Craig, Russ, Cindy, are great people on the implementation side, okay? But there's more to managing things than implementing, okay? And now we have Suzanne gone, right? And we don't have anybody there. We're still looking. In fact, we're sort of re-looking at the way we started to think about her replacement, and that's not going to happen for a number of weeks. So in the meantime, you know, Andy.
Well, I wanted to say to Andy, your grilled cheese today was amazing. Thank you.
Yeah, the food still gets made, but we have, you know about the multiplicity of reports that have to be done, and you know,
all the documentation.
By the time Suzanne left, she had almost 20 years of experience of watching over that program. So, you know, I always say, okay, fine, you know, let's make a change if you want to be creative. Now, how are you going to manage it? So anyway. We'll get you the report.
Yeah, and that's, listen, at least I personally totally feel what you're saying, and I'm sure, you know, there's possibly even a flash of anger when you hear stuff like that, you know, because, you know, I'm not suggesting it's displaced on Andy, but, you know, I just can't, you know, I remember very distinctly how we talked about the construction management company and how we were going to pay them. And we insisted that it was going to be on an hourly basis, and we were reassured that, look, if we're not doing anything, you know, or we were doing relatively little, you're going to be paying us on an hourly basis. And I'm pretty confident if we pull out what we spent, it's pretty much about exactly what it would have been if we were paying them a percentage, close to 10% of outlays. And, you know, but completely agree and don't suggest remotely that.
Well, actually, it might even be higher. It might. I would say I'm taking a pretty educated guess here. That when you have all of that professional expertise, management company expertise, on the front end, and you have documents and other kinds of analysis that they have led, but we haven't done the projects yet. I mean, I think 10% is low. I mean, it's going to be higher than that, because I'll say all we've done. What we did this summer was painting schools and some other things. So we've got a lot of it. We've got a lot invested, right? We have work completed. We have deliverables from Belfour Beatty, but we haven't done the projects yet, right? So anyway, let's just get a report. But you know,
all I know is whenever my accountant does an extension, I get a bill for that, and I go, well, at least we paid for all the work getting through the extension. Then I get another bill for the actual tax return that seems like it's the same amount that I would have paid if I had never had the extension. So, you know,
that's an interesting analogy. We'll get you the report. I promise you that. Okay.
Okay. So our last item of the evening is the consent calendar, and I would like to acknowledge and thank our many donors this time. And we've got the Topa Topa PTA, $5,000, Rotary Club of Ojai, $2,500. Various donors, $1,649. Miners Oaks PTA, $1,000. Food for Thought, $1,250. Rotary Club of Ojai again, $1,250. Gabriela Cesena, $1,500. And Iseline Colburn, $350. And then Juan Carlos Garcia, $2,350 in tree trimming services. So thank you, community members. That's amazing, absolutely amazing. And
you know, I see, of course, is a teacher at San Antonio.
Yeah, right? This is amazing. So thank you so much, everyone, for all of the great things that you're doing for our community. So anyway.
Can I ask a quick question about the consent calendar? Because actually, because there's an election coming up, this reminded me when I was running and I was sitting in the audience, it was sort of consent calendar, and we would all say, yes, and I would go, what, you know? So when I get the consent calendar, I look through it and I ask questions and I get the answers from Andy.
Yeah.
And then I know, yes, I can vote yes. But the community never hears my questions. So is there a way that we should be sharing those questions?
Actually,
or?
the way it would be done, I'm not advocating this, is to spend a lot of time on the consent calendar with you asking the questions here, right? Because
It's the legal way.
yeah, right. So in other words, rather than having the compilation of 4 board members' questions and saying, here's what the board members asked, right? The best way to do it is here. But you could just remind me now, when you send the agenda out to all the various recipients, does the full consent
Yes.
calendar go? That's what I thought.
Included,
Okay.
yes.
Now, it doesn't go to the people you're talking about, right? You're talking about community members who don't get the, but anybody, okay, here's the announcement. Anybody who would like to get the full agenda will get the full agenda.
Is the
And it's
consent
on the
calendar
website.
online?
And it's on it's all on the website.
I
It's all on the
posted on my
website.
Facebook.
There you go.
Okay.
It's all on the
So-
website. So they don't have the benefit of your questions, because that really would be done here. Okay, but they have all the information.
And if they have questions.
They absolutely will. I guarantee you they'll be answered. Absolutely.
Well, you guys, they're always correct when I ask the questions. What you have is correct.
Oh, good, thank you. Well,
Oh, it makes sense.
there you go. Okay, that's nice. That's a nice endorsement. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Andy. Yeah.
Well, I'll move to approve.
Okay.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
None opposed. The meeting is adjourned.